Right, this is episode 35 of Oversight. The last episode was one where we were previewing the playoffs, and then for whatever reason, schedules not overlapping correctly, weren't able to get one out during the playoffs because just depressing, wasn't it? Like, just give up on Overwatch, just going to start over again, probably go with a new game. This game means nothing. It's all just random. And
Fortnite's pretty big.
It is. I'm probably just going to start that. Call it.
Thorin, I would really love to see you on a Fortnite broadcast. Can you please cast some Fortnite? That would be great. I really think you bring like the wholesome vibe that Ninja goes for. That pairing for casting, extraordinary.
You would blend very well with the brand, I think.
Well, the genius I didn't understand actually. Ninja's taught me a lot about esports. Like for the first 10 years or so in esports, I've often told this story. I used to make like minimum wage because I hadn't in any way figured out how to brand myself right. And so then when I started to brand myself, I thought, right, well, obviously people want like an interesting personality, like jokes, like the ability to tell stories. It's like, no, actually, I made a mistake there. You know, being just a really boring guy that just does all the stuff by the book. It turns out that can be branded as well. I mean, if I'd have known this, you know, I wouldn't have had to insult my friends to Polish. I wouldn't have had to make so many edgy comments, gone political, you know. If only I'd known the whole time, Shrouded Ninja, you don't have to have a personality. Oh, why?
And who knew that hip-hop, the music of like fierce individualism and trash talking would be so, you know, interested in doing content with these people who really just seem to be about as, you know, a soft a touch as possible. It's a very weird collaboration.
Well, some people would say that mistakenly gave Ninja the idea that he had what you call a hood pass, but he later learned actually that he didn't have one of those, if you know anything about that particular culture. So anyway, the episode's begun. That's the end of the Fortnite segment of the show. Our guests for this episode, obviously Monte Cristo, usual co-host here. Probably going to be an episode of a lot of boasting, you know. He was right about all the predictions, you know. All the narratives he set up. Right. All the dominoes have fallen just as planned, you know. It was all a setup the whole time. Just to keep the show interesting. He wanted you to cheer against the team that was winning all the time because he knew in the end it'd make it mean more when they lost. So anyway, I'm spoiler there. I guess
ZP's used to that feeling as a Patriots fan, so.
Oh, just already going to start that. Look, it's bad enough that dealing with Hex on a regular basis, he has an Eagles keychain, and the Eagles beat both the Vikings and the Patriots. I don't need another person adding into that. Hex is enough torture. Believe me.
I mean, if it's any consolation, you shouldn't have won like half of those Super Bowls mainly due to cheating. So actually, to be fair, must feel nice to just lose legit this time. I mean, it's sort of like payment in a way, you know. Everyone has to pay the piper of Etchy, my friend. So,
clearly.
So, shame you couldn't have just videoed what the Eagles were doing in practice. You probably could have seen all those trick plays, right? Would have been, in fairness, it's a great strategy. Just don't get caught. It's the American philosophy, right? I didn't understand this actually.
It works for investment banking. Why not pro sports?
You know, this is a point that actually like Jordan Peterson and other sort of modern thinkers have made, is that because if you grow up in the West, you know, certain Enlightenment values are just part of culture. They're just embedded. So the idea of fair play, the idea that like, you know, you don't sort of like screw someone over just because you can. I didn't realize actually that those aren't like exported everywhere around the world and just accepted by other ideologies. So for example, in English football, we actually have a concept of fair play, which means if someone gets injured, even if you have if the team, say their team has possession of the ball, what they do is they will kick it out to the touchline so that then someone can come and like attend to the person who's injured. And the universal concept, it's not a rule, it's totally an unwritten rule, is if they kick the ball out because their player is injured, because they had possession, when their player is like up again, you give them the ball back. You actually like throw it back to them because it's a concept of fair play, right? What I didn't understand was when I then started watching American sports, I was like, why is everyone just like repeatedly cheating, trying to get fouls, lying about what the fuck's going on here? Like, and then I realized in America, you have a different sentiment. It's actually a great line. The line is, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, which I actually, in a way, I can sort of appreciate. That's a bit fucked up morally, but it's true. You will win more games. You will win more games. So guests for this episode, we've alluded already there to ZP, who is obviously wearing a radio communication headset from World War II.
I mean, it's great. I mean, it is absolutely reliable. It's lasted for the last, what, 60, 70, 80 years? I'm bad at math. Whatever it might be now.
World War II, that famous event that occurred in the 1960s. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the other voice you just heard there, Bren. Because the thing is, Just haven't had him on yet, have we?
No,
so,
we haven't.
I'm just going to be honest. You know, we've had here's the thing, Ben. Eventually, we've had everyone else on. We've got to have you on as well.
It's just it swings and roundabouts. Isn't
Otherwise,
it?
Well, also he has been the most successful analyst at predicting matches in the playoffs so far.
Exactly.
I think they actually got some right yesterday.
They're still not caught up. They're still only 1 to 5, whereas I'm 2 to 5. So what does that say?
It means you're twice as good as everyone else.
The sad thing is, though, Monty, Bren has been doing what we used to in League of Legends called the crumbs approach, where you just pick
the opposite, right? Yeah.
But the thing is, though, right, the reason crumbs is considered legendary is he got like 2 right ever, but because those 2 were at exactly the right moment, everyone vividly remember. Your problem is just that you're in the one game where actually none of the upsets are happening, mate. Like the winner does win every time, so everyone's laughing at you, but you would have been legendary if you'd got any of these right.
Also, the crumbs, the crumbs thing worked at the time because it wasn't like he was doing it like during Worlds when like a Vietnamese team would come in and upset the shit out of TSM or something like that. So nobody had any data points. But Bren, when you spend an entire season predicting the Shanghai Dragons, it does lose some of its magic when you choose them, even if they were to win, which they didn't.
They were due.
Yeah, they didn't.
They were due.
But I've got a different mentality when it comes to predictions and the analyst desks when it comes to Overwatch League, because this is like my personal theory that I've noticed over time just from watching the Overwatch League. Because you look at other esports games, right? And generally speaking, the crowd that watches it, they understand the game to a reasonable level. But in Overwatch, they don't actually understand the game to a reasonable level.
No,
so like
when it's a very complicated game. To be fair.
It is complicated. That's a good point. But how I noticed this was actually like when you go to other esports games and other esports events, little minute things that the players do that have huge impacts that might not be more noticeable on the screen. The crowd will cheer, the crowd will they react to it. Yeah. In Overwatch, when the team fight is quite clearly lost and it's going to be prolonged for another 30 seconds because 3 players have died, they don't cheer until it actually says, team kill or round over. That's when they start
That's their version of the applause, applause now.
You could literally see, it's like a 6 versus 3 and it's not going to change. Like the fight is over, it is lost. Yeah. The 3 players are trying to reset and everybody's like, so exciting and it's not. I'm just gonna
turn it around.
That's what I do. I just do analysis over that. I just someone just stops doing play-by-play and I just talk.
So because you have to do analysis there, because if you don't do analysis at that point, you wait to for everyone to be done, then you have 5 seconds to talk.
Exactly. You have to do it during that fight when it's
because of that point. I don't treat the test segments as something that you should dive deep into. I kind of just use it for mainly just trying to be as entertaining as possible. If that means pandering to the Shanghai Dragons to farm Twitter followers, so be it.
A man, that was the end with goal high standards.
It's the way he told the whole story, right? Where it was about the contextual analysis of the way the scene works and how Overwatch is different. At the very end, he just goes, "I was just pandering for Twitter followers." It's why? What was the build up there? And it's all the mad justification at the end. He just goes, "Just wanted some Twitter followers." Okay. To be fair, though, you are right. That does tilt me because I've seen that happen in 2 other esports games. And when I mention them, you'll see the common trend, which is it's the esports games that at the time capture all the casual fans who aren't super into that game or esports. Yeah. So it's League of Legends and it's StarCraft 2 because they also had to be commentated in a way which was objectively stupid. Because in League of Legends, right, when your team is down 15k gold, has no Baron, they have to keep. Can they protect the Nexus? They must. Will they? 2 of them alive still? The death timers is this is over. What are you talking about? Yeah. The worst ever has to be StarCraft though, because in StarCraft, right, you'd have this guy would have 40 units. All his bases are busted and mined out. The other guy's got 3 bases, full 200 army. He's just coming in. He just won a massive fight when it was even strength. He's bringing his army into the base, and all the casters would all be like, "He must hold. Can he hold?" It's well, if he could, it'd be a fucking miracle, wouldn't it? Come on.
Well, it was possible. That's why Brood War was the great game, though, right? Because it was possible in StarCraft 1 in those situations to sometimes pull off.
Because you could micro in those ones. You couldn't really do it as much as StarCraft.
You also had high ground advantage, and you also had a lot of counters. So if you're trying to send, even if you have 200 supply of Marines and they're going up a ramp in Brood War, and there's 1 lurker up there, it can kill all of your Marines if you're stupid, right? So anyway. just a difference in the games. But yes, I do agree about StarCraft and about League. You know, the crazy thing about League too was that, you know, I'm not sure where it is right now, but when I was casting, there were some crazy stats at times where it's like, if a team has like 1,000 gold advantage at 10 minutes, they have something like a 75% chance of winning the game. It snowballed so hard.
It's madness.
Yeah. Okay, so where do we even begin? Because remember, technically we haven't talked about the whole playoffs. So maybe let's save the delectable results. We'll get to those. Coming into the playoffs, actually, you know, people expected Philadelphia Fusion probably to beat Boston Uprising. They were, you know, they came in obviously with like a great record overall, but they sort of dropped off. The Spitfire Gladiators won. Here's the interesting thing. Some people went either way on that one. I noticed a lot of people actually were saying they thought Spitfire could do it because obviously everyone's dream was that they would get to amazing form and make an epic run. Right, Bren, coming into the playoffs, did you actually have a sense that like form's going to carry over from the last stage, or does the fact that, you know, it's weeks later, I mean,
no,
like
I actually
reset, it's like a different tournament? What was your philosophy?
I thought it was going to be completely different. Like you couldn't really use the previous stage as an example because one, we'd have a patch change going into it as well, and some of these teams are notoriously bad on new patches, like Boston. But to counter,
but you predicted Boston, so
I did because
you needed them Twitter followers. You got to understand.
Exactly. My thought process was Boston are always terrible for the first 2 to 3 weeks of a patch in a stage, and I thought the time they had to scrim and learn the patch and the meta would be enough for them to actually turn into a decent team, because Boston was my favorite team to watch in stage 3 because they were so methodical. They were very smart in the way they played. It was a slow approach. They had great set strategies. And I thought I was going to carry over. You know, it did slightly into stage 4 towards the tail end of stage 4. And I was like, okay, well, maybe if they have a few weeks to prep, it might be turned around. And Philadelphia as well have been quite inconsistent in comparison. They've been very flaky throughout the entire season. So I just thought they had an edge there. But nope, Philly are just too bloody strong with their DPS, aren't they?
The other interesting thing about meta changes Overwatch 2 is that we've seen teams literally go from first to worst, and I'll loop this in later, but the best example I'll always point to about how meta change can completely just change the fortune of a team would be eUnited from Contenders last season, or I'm sorry, last year, where they were season 0 champions and then 7th in season 1, literally like a month and a half later. So the consistent thing about Overwatch is that if you're not really keeping on top of like what teams are doing behind the scenes, you can have very, very radical changes in a relatively short period of time.
I guess a lot of people are going to discuss the meta because it is weird. We're jumping ahead a little bit. It is weird that we have the 5th and 6th teams, like the bottom 2 teams in the playoffs in the finals. Like, that's strange. And a lot of people are going to say, well, what about this patch that happened right before playoffs? But it isn't even the biggest patch that we've had in Overwatch League. Like, if you look at the Mercy changes after stage 1, I do think it was pretty significant. But, and we'll get to New York, but there also isn't on paper a reason why New York shouldn't have been able to play this patch.
Right, Jonak's very mechanically skilled. Why can't he play DPS? You know,
why are they Libero is the classic Hanzo. Yeah, is a classic one. Like, you just spent 2 stages. We'll get into this. I don't want to get into this right now. We will get into it. But on paper, there wasn't a reason why that should happen. So I do think, obviously, like, it has affected the playoffs. But I think if we go down the list of playoff teams, it starts to make a little bit of sense as to even if there hadn't been a big patch, this same scenario might have occurred. Both because Philadelphia and London have been very streaky in the past, either very hot or very cold at times. The New York one, I think, is the most surprising one. Valiant, obviously, were looking good, but they, on an individual skill level, never had the same ability to peak as high, I think, as Philadelphia and London. Same with the Gladiators.
I agree, yeah.
Yep. So I think it just came down to Philadelphia and London both coming in hot at the right time. Also, Boston was riding, they had the 3rd seed, but a lot of that was because of their success before losing their star player and their coach. So, there were a lot of internal changes in that team that I think caused their performance to dip.
Okay, so as Bren alluded to there, when people were like shadow boxing this matchup of what will happen when Boston plays against Philly, one of the things about Philadelphia, funnily enough, also a similar story with the Spitfire team, is a lot of the reason why people were interested is because they thought the ceiling of this team is so interesting. You know, like they've got so many good players, they could be so good. And in this particular series, it's like you say, obviously, in this particular meta, their DPS is too good, whereas that has been something that obviously has been something of the downfall of Boston the last few stages. One of the things they had issues with was Striker's still a very good player, but he was something of a one-dimensional player. Then obviously they lost their other main DPS who was a star. So where do you come down on that, ZP? Like, could Boston have won this series?
It felt like Boston was mostly in a decline. I mean, both for the reasons of losing players, but also just the entire coaching change is something that seems pretty difficult to deal with mid-season. I mean, obviously there's an anomaly, right, where you have Arrow come in mid-season for the fuel and it works out well, but it doesn't really matter because they can't make playoffs anymore. Could Boston have come back here in the situation? I mean, theoretically, I mean, going back to the idea that anyone can come back in any time, it would have been surprising, but the fact that Philly ended up winning just didn't really shock me, just in the fact that after stage 3, it felt like Boston was on the decline. And also, I mean, again, it comes down to how much do you want to attribute to Krusty and how important he was for the team.
Okay. What do you think Boston's problem was, Monty?
Yeah, again, like I think that Boston was a very solid team. That the thing is that over the course of the season, when they had Dream Casper, they had a star level player to lean on. And when they lost Dream Casper, they had to go back to, they had to form like a very good strategies. They had to be a very well coached team that was more than the sum of its parts. And then they lose Krusty. So like, I think you can lose one of those two things and still do okay. I don't think you can lose both and do okay in the long run. And then when dive wasn't possible anymore, because so much of their success was built around the synergy between Gamsu and Striker's insane ability to clutch out these like overtime points. I mean, how many, like for multiple matches on their 10-0 run in stage 3, it was like, it's down to the tiebreaker match. Somebody's winning 3-2. It's 0.3 on Oasis and Striker has to, go play out of his mind just to like drag them across the finish line. They were very close to losing a lot of those matches. And I think that's like a pretty strong indictment is, when the Tracer went away, they weren't going to have that clutch ability anymore. They weren't going to be able to lean on that synergy. And with a new patch and some changes, they couldn't just rely on dive. And that means, hey, that you need a strong coaching staff that's going to be able to help you guide you through a new meta and a new play style. And, like Bren was saying, it took them a long time to adjust in stage 4. They did start to get there, I think, by the end. But Philly, I think, is just great for this, great on this patch. And also Philly, we said at the start of this season, this is going to be a team that has so much talent on it that they're going to be able to figure it out eventually. Yeah. And so they figured it out at the right time, it looks like.
Was this a flaw of Boston? That if you look at the Philly team, they put in a whole bunch of different players, they had different rotations, whereas Boston just kept the whole 6 for all the matches. They just had their one team. They didn't go deep on their bench. Like, was this an actual flaw? Would it have mattered?
You talk bench depth is a trick. Go ahead.
No is the answer. I don't think so, because the Boston team, their biggest strength was their teamwork, which a lot of that they got from playing the same core. Like they knew how to play around each other. That was their biggest strength always, was actually having incredible teamwork and playing around their abilities and knowing exactly when to engage and disengage, because they knew what was going on at all times. Like that was why they were such a brilliant team. So you only really get that from building up synergy with a core group of 6 or 7 players and not swapping out the roster. Surprise, surprise, London, as soon as they cut the deadweight players, they start performing very well once they've only got a few more. So that's where essentially Boston's strength lied. So I don't think that was a problem there with them just keeping that roster.
Okay. What about this then? Because like in the past metas in Overwatch, one of the things I actually enjoyed was, I mean, this will sound mad, but even when like Dallas Fuel wasn't a good team, the difference is if Effect could play Tracer, I could still watch the game. I could still enjoy something, or he had a chance to go off, show some really nice moves, Yeah. In the current meta, what is it about the situation at the moment where someone like Striker, who ended up being okay on Widowmaker, it's not like he could really do anything in a lot of the losses anyway. It's like he didn't even... Can you individually still go off in the current meta?
Yeah, you can absolutely can.
Definitely.
Striker was my vote for the T-Mobile MVP actually, because I actually really rated his tracer for one. He dunked on Sabi, who was also considered to be the best tracer in the world in their 1v1. And when his team needed a Widowmaker player, the guy just like went into the hyperbolic time chamber and just grinded out Widowmaker for like hours and hours and hours, and got up to a reasonable level at Overwatch League, which is just ridiculous because he was essentially a tracer, one trick. He had a bit of Junkrat mixed in as well. So I had big props to the guy, and he was like, you need that one core stable, consistent player to build around in these teams if you're going to find success, and Striker was that guy. Yeah, it's entirely possible to pop off. I mean, look at Carpe. Literally, in my opinion, the only reason Philly win a lot of their matches is like it's an overtime push. They shouldn't be winning it. Suddenly, Carpe gets 3 kills just on the side, and you're like, hang about. You're looking at the kill thing. It's just Carpe kills support, Carpe kills the Mercy, Carpe kills the tank, and it's like, yo, hold on 1 second. You were not supposed to be winning that fight, and again, it's like these clutch moments. It's entirely possible because, in theory, if you hit all your shots, Widowmaker is the most busted hero in the game.
I will say to that last part, it's actually ridiculous, especially for some of the Philly games where you're just like, you look at the opening, and from a caster point of view, you look towards early pickoffs and go, okay, well, this is obviously going to go, the other way. And then you suddenly see, Carpe got 1. It's still probably winnable for their team. Wait, Carpe got 2. Now it's fight.
Yeah.
Wait, Carpe got 3. Wait,
winnable.
Yeah, it's like he just ends up shifting fights that should be lost for the Fusion into winnable fights, and it's like, how does this keep happening?
Do you think Carpe is the best Widowmaker at the moment?
In the playoffs, yeah.
Playoffs, yes. Overall, tricky. I also think that Widow is a more variable character from week to week, just by its very nature. So you'll have someone that looks like the best Widowmaker ever on 1 week, and then next week, maybe not so much. Like it does vary more so than other characters.
Maybe that's why it's the Widowmaker, because one week everything's going great. Next thing, you're the one getting capped. You're the one getting shown up. She's moved on. She's got a new love in her life. Took all the fame with her. Okay, what about this then? So on the other side of the DPS duo for Philly was obviously EQO, who, if you look at the overall Overwatch season, when you consider this was a guy who wasn't some famous player before the Overwatch League, he was just playing for that Israel team.
I was saying this last night, actually.
Yeah, that's actually going to be one of the most, whoever the GM is of Philadelphia, fucking well played, mate. That's one of the finds of the whole season, right? The guy's outrageous, especially because in a world where there's no Dreamcasper, what ridiculous versatility this guy's had as well as the DPS. It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely, I think you can make an argument. I think he's really the only argument at this point as the best Western player. So I think he's exceptional. The guy who put that team together is Kirby, who's the coach of the Fusion. So they picked him up, and he was the one who assembled that roster. I'm not sure which, if any, of his assistant coaches were helpful with that, whether it was Hui or Hayes, like BZ, all these guys who help work for the team.
I find it very interesting that. Sorry, Monte, continue.
No. But yeah, that's where EQO came from, and there was he was very highly ranked on the European ladder at the time, because I remember when we were talking to him at World Cup for Israel, he had been #1 on multiple occasions, et cetera, et cetera.
So what's crazy about that is EQO was playing on 150 ping as well on the European servers, right? Still getting the #1 spot, even with a ping disadvantage. And I find it very interesting as well that Philadelphia, one of the only teams that made use of European talent in terms of building their squads. That's really interesting to me, because the European Overwatch scene is one that's sort of underrepresented in a little way in terms of there's not too many tournaments going on. There weren't at a certain point. There are now with contenders, but it was always sort of the forgotten stepchild when it came to that sort of region, and it had tons of talent in it. Essentially, they just literally imported Europeans into North America in 2016, 2017, and they were just winning all the Overwatch tournaments. So I was I was very surprised when Philadelphia were the only ones picking from this European pool of players, and they just had, they could just pick the best players out of Europe, and of course they're going to have a great team just based off that alone. They can just have their own, they can build a super team off the base of it. So yeah, that's actually crazy to me that nobody really took advantage of it. But I think it's down to the fact that no team really had a European coach as well that understood the scene too well, other than Philly.
So 2 things at last point is that one for EQO is that the other part that's very remarkable is that he wasn't going into it immediately likely to be the starter, where, of course, the person that everyone thought was going to be Philly's savior in the beginning was Shadowburn, based on his reputation. So he actually had to fight his way from the second string to go, hey, I actually, I'm a very good at projectile DPS, and basically earning the starter spot. So you want to talk about someone who's on a training treadmill and sort of proving himself throughout the season. That's another factor going into it. The second thing, Brent, your idea of European talent in OWL, this is kind of a broader point, but I do wonder how that's going to go into OWL Season 2, because right now the way EU Contenders is going is that it makes it a little bit harder to judge talent, because they're kind of stuck in a mode where you're seeing a lot of quad tank and sort of compositions that don't get played as much at the OWL level, nor really showcase the abilities of players as fluently as, say, more traditional compositions go. So I do think there's a world where EU ends up being still underrepresented going into Season 2, just because of the weirdness that's been going on in EU Contenders right now.
It reminds me a lot, actually, sometimes when I watch Contenders of like the difference between college football and the NFL, where in college football you see all those like option, offenses, and that's why with the NFL draft, people are always saying, I wonder if this guy can actually, this quarterback can perform in an NFL style environment, or this running back, or there's this receiver, because the NFL offenses are much more complex, fewer gimmicks, and also a lot of times, like if you're a super good college like running back or quarterback, the talent is spread so thin among so many colleges that you can just like hard carry a game, and it's much harder to do that in the NFL.
Well, the track record for those Heisman Trophy winners, it ain't nice.
It's not good
when you get to the NFL.
It's not good.
And to be specific, as I found out there, the reason why you do see more things like quad tank at the Contenders level is that those are strategies that are inherently require more execution to counter and more just general coordination to counter, which isn't always there for a lot of the Contenders teams.
Yeah. And
so
they're easy to play themselves at the same time.
Exactly.
Because you don't have to worry about coordinating flanks. You just run in there with a bunch of tanks, right? It's not as complex to run. But yes, that does give you questions, because obviously you can see some players' mechanics, but you have no idea if they have a brain to go along with their aiming ability, right? So I think but it will be an interesting thing to come up with. And I think that's natural, just because they're not going to be practicing as much as the OWL teams. They're not going to have the same coaching staff or infrastructure. They're not as advanced players. So it does make sense. But I agree. It'll be interesting to see what happens with a lot of these players once they actually get into Overwatch League.
Right. Before we leave Boston, obviously there's a long time till next season. Many things can come and go. As a team, what do they need to change, do you think, if they want to be a team that's, again, contending for the top spots? Because obviously it's been like the latter half of the, well, not quite, latter quarter into the playoffs has been underwhelming. What do they need to change as a team?
If I was Huck, this is what I would do, right? Because if you're so confident in your abilities to build a team from scratch and spot talent and scout these players, I would sell all the players that I've proven to be decent for.
I like this. Okay, keep going.
I would sell.
At least the new expansion teams. Got it.
Yeah, I would sell the Gamsu just for mega money, Note for mega money. Might keep Striker because I think he's pretty sick. You build a team around him, right?
Your strategy is to flip all the players.
Yeah, I flip all the players.
Brett's like short-term gains, short-term.
Making that money, because if you're so confident, you can build.
And then Brett's like, and then I think Huck should fucking quit and just take that money.
And then flip himself. Just go listen.
And move to Mexico.
Actually, maybe Bren, you have figured it out there. I've just realised you figured out the trick, mate. What you should do is sell all the really good players, and then tell the Boston, I've got a strategy here. There's a strategy here. And at the end, just say to another team who he sold a bunch of the players to, just buy me as well. I actually picked all those players and sold them to you. Flip himself at the end, and then he's fixed the whole problem. I mean, Boston's fucked, but he's fixed the whole problem for himself. You're right. If you were Huck and you were a selfish man, obviously Huck isn't, then that is what you might do, man. But what should the Boston Uprising order? Why should they sell all the players? So he can make his rep over again?
Well, I mean, he's very confident in the fact, Huck, he's very proud of the fact that everyone was saying Boston were not going to perform well at the start of the season because they were looking at these unknown players. I mean, at the end of the day, if he's so confident, why not just do it again? Why not suddenly, flip these players, make a bit of money, You got a bigger budget now. You got a bit more to work with. You pick up a few more star underrated players.
Oh my lord! Here's
it's gonna be a lot harder to do that.
Listen, Monty, I'm playing the game out here, bro.
Okay, tell you why you don't do that. No, Bren, you don't do that because these players have 1+1 contracts, which means that you can get them for the same price. Because we know that Boston was building. These aren't like superstar players. They don't have the highest salaries in the league. Let's put it that way. You have an option to get these players for that same salary again next season. Absolutely, you activate those options at this point in time. The other reason why you don't do that is because if you get rid of all these players, you cannot sign players unless they're from Toronto Esports, their sister team, like their contenders team, until after the new teams, the expansion team, to sign.
No, I forgot about
literally,
that.
My point.
Huck would literally have to either take Toronto Esports or wait until however many expansion teams we have sign their players and then just like try and like comb through everybody that's left.
I hear the Open Division has some good players.
Yeah, so
there is that path to pro. So maybe what you do is you go to the very beginning of the path and you scout all the good players there who are playing with their friends.
Huck, if you listen to me, I'm a good Widowmaker. Just saying.
So to be clear, by the way, in the window, just so people are aware, is that basically September 9th is the keep or cut deadline for the teams on their existing players. And then immediately after that, it goes into a full month window for all new expansion teams to have full reign on all free agents, players that were cut from existing OWL teams, and also any players that they'd want to grab from contenders teams that were not brought up into their mother team, so to speak. So there is a period where if you currently have an academy team that you can sign those players before the expansion team get a hold of it. But there's going to be a very generous window for expansion teams to basically get the best picks of the new players. So in a sense, if you have to cut a lot of your roster from season one as an existing team, you're actually in a much worse spot than the teams that are coming in because you're going to have to make a team with a relatively picked over field.
It does though. You do have an advantage because you will have the first shot at your own contenders players. So if you have a contenders team, you're in better shape. Let's put it that way. But yeah,
if that contenders team is good, yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, and especially for teams that ended at the bottom of the standings. There's not a lot of motivation for players to sign with them too, because even if you, let's say, like, you think you can get an offer from the Shanghai Dragons or the Florida Mayhem, well, why would you wait? Why wouldn't you just sign on with the new expansion team that doesn't have like that same history and that is like, at least you have like a clean slate, right? Yeah. To start off the league with, and you can sign immediately instead of having to wait at the end of the month to sign to one of these other teams. So I think, as you're saying, it's going to be very difficult for teams that finish the season at the bottom of the rankings to improve their squads in the offseason. Unless they find some crazy diamond in the rough.
To be clear, there's a funny thing here. As Fusion could win the grand finals, I think it's also comical that as far as academy teams go, they have one of the very best academy teams in terms of talent, where they're going to have so many options to potentially trade off players. It is actually ridiculous. Players like Alarm, 100% will be in OWL next season. Players like Elk, very likely OWL next season. Then Who Are You? I don't know if he's turning 18 or not in time, but also very good player. I mean, they have a lot of depth on their academy team in particular. So they're kind of living the dream where you have a baseball team that wins the World Series, and then you have a farm system that's also stocked and ready to go. So Philly's
there ain't nobody in this fucking chat follows baseball, mate. Keep the analogies to the sports that some of us actually. Our dads didn't take us for a fucking hot dog wiener and a shit 8-hour sport. So I appreciate the effort, but I honestly now I know what League of Legends fans feel like when I start giving like an NBA analogy from the 90s, and they're like, I don't follow that sport, don't know who that is. What is that? Read
Moneyball at some point, it will enrich your life.
So sadly, it'll also ruin esports journalism for 2 years, but enough about that. Right, unfortunately, Who I U's birthday is August, so yes, he should be 17. That means he's 17.
No, 18.
No, 18.
Oh, in that case, no, he's not going to be for the next season. Right, he won't be available next season. That's a shame.
Okay, so the point I wanted to make was, if these teams don't get first dibs if they're a pre-existing team, here's the question then. Is Shanghai Dragons going to get a win in stage one?
Already starting the hype trade.
I mean,
here, get a win in stage one.
Here is the advantage that Shanghai has. So I think it's probably safe to assume, given the the viewership in China and given the expansion plans, I think it's probably safe to assume that we're going to get another Chinese team. Blizzard's focusing on Asia and Europe as the expansion. I think one more Chinese team is likely. Now, surely, in those 1 billion plus people, and because the only teams that are going to be looking at Chinese players are Chinese teams, and that is the Shanghai Dragons and maybe one more. Okay. Do you think, like, we all agree that it would be very unusual if a Chinese player was on a team that was not a Chinese team, right?
It would be very unusual, yeah.
So considering I haven't heard any hype in the West about any of the players in Contenders China, like hype enough that, a Western team's like going out there and being like, yes, we want to get this Chinese guy on the team. So if, they will have access, what I'm saying, to a massive pool of players. And you know what? They also have a massive access to other Chinese-speaking countries like Taiwan. So, like they have they should be able to get between like the Taiwanese World Cup team, the Chinese World Cup team, all the Chinese Contenders players. We should be able to field 2 rosters of Chinese players. And I think that out of all of those players, the Shanghai Dragons can probably assemble a team of purely Chinese players that is better than their roster last year.
Two things to that. The first one being that Shanghai Dragons recently posted an advertisement, and they were looking for a new everything. So a new coach, new manager, just essentially to completely revamp this management and coaching staff. But also they were looking for a Chinese to Korean translator still. So somebody who speaks Mandarin, Korean, and English still now, which tells me that they're still looking to build around Korean players, or potentially the Korean players that they have.
I mean, they shouldn't get rid of some of their Korean.
They really shouldn't.
They shouldn't get rid of Fearless. Like, that would be silly.
And second to that is also the second point is that Contenders China, I think the talent there, the players, at least from what I've watched, the Chinese teams, they tend to just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks when it comes to how they understand Overwatch. And I don't think they're at the same level as our teams. I think they're below a lot of other regions when it comes to understanding Overwatch. So I think that they're going to struggle even then if they do try and pick up some Chinese players. Now you can pick up some mechanically skilled players, like they did with Dia. They might find success there because you don't really need to understand the game. You can just click heads, forehead, lol. So it's you don't need to understand the game to be able to do that. But that's where I can see issues cropping up for.
So I will say one thing, Monte, I agree with your logic and points, and I literally pretty much said the same spiel earlier in the season when asked, hey, will Shanghai Dragons get a win? And this was before midseason signings. I go, well, okay, things are rough, but China has a lot of great players. No reason why they shouldn't be able to sign players and revamp things. I agree that these are all reasons why they should be able to make a good team, but it also didn't happen in season 1. So I look at that, I'm just like, it all makes sense as to why they should, but it also didn't happen when they had the chance in season 1. So now I'm just I'm a little bit shy predicting that they will.
Yeah, but the formation of the team was also a result of like that U4 guy, like picking a bunch of players, and it looked sort of like cronyism for sure. A lot of the players that people thought would be in the league were either too young. I think that's a big problem with the Chinese scene. Is that yeah, miraculously so. Or they were going off. Yeah, they were going to different games. Like some of them went to PUBG, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think there was like an element of favoritism. But the problem with the Shanghai Dragons is that by the time this team showed up in Overwatch League and started losing, like, why would you sign a contract to this team? Like, I'm sure Shanghai went out to a lot of players, but if I'm a Contenders player and the Shanghai Dragons are like 0-20, come to me and like offer me a contract, and I'm already on a Contenders team getting paid, I'm just like, fuck no, I'll just play well in Contenders and get picked up by an expansion team next year. Like, why would I sign with Shanghai?
I know for a fact that actually happened.
It's the least surprising thing ever, right? Because imagine yourself in that situation. You're like the hot shit in Contenders. You're super confident you're going to get a fat contract from maybe a decent team. So you're sitting there, and because there's no draft, there's no obligation for anybody to go play with Shanghai. So you just sit there and you're like, you know what? Good luck in your last 2 months. I'm not really interested in joining this like dumpster fire of a team. I'm just going to wait it out. I'll just play in contenders. I got my contract, I got my salary, and then somebody's going to pick me up at the end of this year. That's definitely what I would have done if I was a professional player.
Right. You know what? I'm going to have to step in here. I normally just let conversations ride tangents, but I should never have allowed Bren to ask that question because there are literally fucking 10 best of fives to discuss on this show, and you're all talking about a team that's not even in the playoffs, never won a match, and won't be playing again for fucking 7 months or something. Like, what are you doing right now? So anyway, well derailed.
Now for my podcast.
Well derailed, but we're back on track now. So what I thought we'd do is this. Since we've addressed Boston there, luckily, since in the playoffs, obviously, you can follow the track through that then Philadelphia goes through and plays New York. Let's do the New York semi-final, and then we'll come back and do Spitfire and go into the other one. So, coming into this one, Monty, right, I actually thought Yiska has really stepped his meme game up because that video he did with all those like empty sandbags in the back, that was fucking legit. That was really well done. But obviously, Monty, people want to know, address the whole topic. So obviously in stage 4, there was the whole thing of like, is NYXL sandbagging? Are they actually testing out some sort of like weird variant of like, can you do what seemingly doesn't work in the meta and get that working so they're even more well-rounded? There's a lot of different directions people could go with the narrative and the analysis. What do you think now that you've seen the matches of NYXL in stage 4 now coming into the playoffs?
I mean, we knew they were sandbagging. That's not even like remotely a question. And I think that people are just idiots and they don't even understand what the term sandbagging
Monty,
means.
when people got mad at you, they were actually getting mad and saying, Monty said that they were sandbagging, but now he says that they've also rested on their laurels. I was like, in what way are those two mutually exclusive? Exactly. Wouldn't one lead to the other? Like, that's bizarre to me as to how you think that's a changed storyline.
It's exactly 2 different ways. How dare you change your story?
Like, it's exactly the same thing, right? Like, there's no difference in what happened because we knew the team was giving interviews where their coaching staff was literally saying they don't care about stage 4. We know the teams were announcing that they were cutting their scrim time. Like, these are all things we know. Like, we know that the team itself was admitting to it. And why wouldn't you do that? Like, who, if you were coaching that team, was going to be there cracking the whip? I mean, we've heard on this show how many times now about how tired the players are after this season. It's been just an exhausting haul. And if you have the luxury of being able to rest your players and then grind hard in secret, in scrims before the playoffs, why the fuck wouldn't you do that? And there's a lot of like key things to understand here, because even if you're coming from traditional sports, which obviously you have a hot, if you've locked in a playoff seed, you rest your star players, you are sandbagging at that point in time because you're trying to get an advantage later on for not trying as hard now. But the crazy thing about esports that's different than most professional sports is that if I'm playing on an NBA team, I'm not practicing against other NBA teams, right? I'm just having my games against them. If I'm an NFL team, I'm not, I don't fly around and go practice other NFL teams during the week. You practice against your B team, you practice internally, and then you go and you play the game against your opponent. The thing with esports is because professional teams, their practice is not internal most of the time. It is external with other teams. If you are the best team in the league, the only thing basically that you get from practice, you just make your opponents better by scrimming against them, basically.
Yeah.
It's like people don't think about that in esports, but it is definitely a factor that exists. So by cutting scrim time, I don't even think it hurt them in the long run. I think that's going to be like a great question about New York is what exactly caused this? Because we alluded to this earlier, but on paper, coming into this meta, this should have been a just great meta for them. They have Sabilby and Pine on Widowmaker. They have Libero, who has, over the course of his career, I don't even think you can say anybody else has been the best Hanzo player in Overwatch history is Libero because he's been playing it more. New York played more Hanzo than any other team except for the Houston Outlaws in the regular season. And then when he was buffed, they did like for the first match against Philly, they just didn't play him more. Now, by the time they got to the second one, they had made those adaptations. But you have Jonak, who we know is very good mechanically. We've seen him on Roadhog and Tracer in the past. If you even look at some of their maps, Junkertown, they were 9-3 coming into yesterday on that map. And that map is the most similar to the current meta, as in double sniper, your flex support is flexing on a Roadhog. And they were excellent on that map. So, why they couldn't get it together over 4 weeks is such a fucking mystery. Because even when we saw them in stage 4, like before they had locked things up, let me go back to this match. But it was very interesting because we had this question at the start of stage 4 with New York. It's like, why aren't you? It was their match against Florida. Like they weren't playing with Brigitte. Brigitte was obviously very strong. And we figured out that same week, 2 days later, they played against London. They beat London. And that's when the Brigitte and all the stage 4 strats come out. So we know they had adapted to that patch before they had locked up the #1 seed. They lock up the #1 seed and it looks like they're experimenting. But I think the saddest thing about New York is we really didn't see the tailored strategy coming into the playoffs. Like there wasn't so many times throughout the season. When I was casting them, I'd be reviewing all the footage, all the tapes before the games, looking at all their like hero usage rates and everything. And then they come into this next game and I would see instantly that they were doing something different. And I knew why they were doing it differently because they were playing against this opponent. And I never really got that feeling against Philadelphia at all, which was, they looked tired more than anything else. And I don't know how that's possible when we know they were practicing less. But I think that's the thrust of it, is like these things are mutually exclusive. We know they sandbag. There's nobody who in the scene is going to tell you otherwise. Like we know it. And what we don't know is like, how come this one time with all of the right pieces to put together a championship run, they look so exhausted and unlike themselves. That's what's weird.
Did you think, like, because obviously coaching was a big thing stressed with NYXL. Obviously, we had Wizard Hyung on the show. He's done a great job of building a mystique and the whole narrative that, he's analyzing the opponents. And the idea is in their team that's so good, they know exactly when to use the different players and sub them in and out. Did they make mistakes in this playoff series compositionally? I mean, the one that springs to mind was when they tried to do that the GOATs comp or whatever, and they like misplayed it. To me, that kind of summarized their season.
I yelled at my screen. I've seen so in contenders right now, there is a phrase that is commonly done where basically a team doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. They're getting stumped. And the phrase is, when in doubt, goats it out. And when I saw NYXL of all teams with their season on the line go to the GOATs comp at the very end, I almost broke my monitor. It's like, why are you doing this? And by the way, he goes on Farah, so it's just like, oh. Yeah.
If you come from the early days of the internet, that sounds like you're saying, when in doubt, goatsy it out, which is, like, I guess in a way, it's kind of what they did. They just created easier access for the end of the game, right? So
don't Google that, by the way.
Do not.
If you're watching the show and you don't know what that reference is,
don't Google that.
Do not Google that. But I agree. God. However, I think it was panic because earlier in their first map was Dorado on Wednesday, and they lost it basically the same way. They charged through the first part of the map, and then they couldn't push it through. But the thing is that the way they lost on Wednesday was they didn't switch to Brigitte in time. They tried for this like Tracer Doomfist thing that was also super weird at the end of the map. And this time they tried to make an adjustment. However, like I think the weirdest thing too was that they had a Hanzo ultimate, and Pine was actually playing very well around the Dragon Strikes on Lijiang Tower. He was getting a million kills with them. And Dragon Strike is a great ultimate for pushing the payload when everybody's trying to fight over it at the very end of some of these points, because it clears everybody off the cart. So I was like, that's going to be, I think, a really hotly debated point, is that he has the ultimate up and switches over the Widow very briefly, and then while still in spawn, they're obviously talking about it, and he switches to Zarya. And there's really not a lot of time to build that ultimate up. So, and EQO being on the far just made things vastly more difficult for them. And EQO played it very well also. But it just looked like New York was never really comfortable with a lot of the counters in this meta. And I don't know, it's so strange because I feel like a lot of the time it's just like, just switch to Brigitte. What's your problem? It's like, I know you guys can play Brigitte just fine. Like, why aren't you switching? Or what are you doing with this starting DPS lineup? Like, why is it Sabilby and Pine on Dorado, which is also sort of strange.
What would have been the key, like if we now play it back after seeing the matches, what would have been the keys to neutralizing the Philadelphia team?
I think what New York did as the series went on was that they dedicated Mono to shutting down Carpe.
You also don't sub out Mono.
Yeah, you don't sub. Well, Jonas did win Lijiang but yes, I agree in principle. Like, I don't understand why you're subbing out Animo and subbing between Animo and Arc. I definitely understand why you're Mono towards the end was definitely on sniper duty. And I think that that's what's going to make the difference. We'll probably get to predictions for the finals, but I think that's what's going to make the difference is that Fury and Gesture have been so good. I mean, they made Soon non-existent. What happened to Soon? Like, I barely recognized that he was in that game.
Soon was forced to switch to Tracer in that game.
Yeah. So I think that the tank line, if you think about how New York has played in the season, and Meko is typically a very defensive tank. And what I mean by defensive tank is that when he's playing Diva, he tends to walk into the back line and peel more than he does dive into the enemy line, right? And the problem is that you can't really play that way because you're not dealing with short-range heroes that are in your backline trying to kill your supports. You have to go to the sniper and stop them from like one-shotting your Mercy or your Zen. And that's not really Meko's style. So maybe that's an issue right there. Mono, I think, was getting it done towards the end, but Carpe is very difficult to shut down. And I think if you do look at Philadelphia, they still have a potential weakness where, as usual, it's been the Philly story all the season, is like if Carpe doesn't pop off, then Philly loses. Like, it's super important that he has a good game.
Okay. What about on Philly's side of the equation? Were they just playing up to par? Was this just have they been consistent throughout the two series? Were they different between the two series?
With Philly, I think because we normally think of Philly as like a team that rely a lot on Carpe to shut people down and clutch out these moments for Philly to get wins. But actually, I have noticed they've stepped it up quite a bit. Like when they started running Sado and Hopper a lot more, I had some question marks there because it seemed like they were a better team. They were more suited to the Fraggy and Poco style because they played more aggressively. But Sado's really stepped it up recently. He's playing around Carpe a lot more. And it's only going to be good things if you enable your best player to really sort of perform in these matches. So Philly they've definitely improved as we've got deeper into the playoffs, I've noticed. And I think they're definitely they don't rely all the time now on Carpe just clutching out these final moments of these team fights. They actually have good strategies in play, at least when they have a game plan. From what I've seen, they don't just sort of chuck bodies at people and hope for the best and wait for the overtime push and wait for Carpe or Ikeo to clean up. They do have an idea in place. But I am slightly worried for them when they're up against London. I mean, we're skipping ahead now to the finals, so I'm not gonna go.
We'll save our comments, but I think that
just to rein it back. I was just going to say, just to rein it back a little bit, I do think one key difference between the two teams here is that how seriously they had to adapt the changes in the meta in the run-up to the playoffs. Philly obviously had to win as many games as possible to get in. Them getting to playoffs was hardly assured, given the seed that they ended up coming back into. And I think in Overwatch is that it can be pretty difficult for teams to catch up meta-wise, even though if they have all the tools that you would think they would have, is that when you sort of take your foot off the gas a little bit, it actually is pretty hard to accelerate midway through the season, where I think Philly probably benefited from the fact that they were in so many win or basically season over games towards the end of stage 4, whereas New York didn't have to spend that amount of attention towards the games they're playing. They could be a little bit more relaxed with it, which, don't get me wrong, very important, especially with how many players are burned out across the board. But I do think just the fact that Philly had to be intimately comfortable with the meta just barely to make playoffs, and New York basically had more flex time, I think ended up contributing quite a bit to New York being unsure, essentially, in their playoff series against Philly, where Philly, for the most part, knew exactly what they wanted to do.
Yeah, and also the one of the interesting things too, for people who are curious, now that New York is out. It's obviously, which teams are practicing against each other does informs the way the meta develops. And people might think, well, maybe New York wasn't practicing against these teams that have defined the meta, because a lot of ways Philly's coaches have been smart and they've adapted well to this patch by doing things like playing Hotba and Poco together and having Hotba play support, like flex support, as well as the DPS on certain maps.
Seems to do very well, right?
Yeah, and that's very important, right? It's a big reason London's having success as well. But they identified that they could use one of their flex tanks as a flex support on some maps to replace Boombox, and they were going to be stronger. That's a really smart use of your roster. But yeah, to go back, Philly and New York were not scrimming before this because obviously if Philly won, they were guaranteed to face New York as the lowest seed because they were the lowest seed in the playoffs. But New York and London were. So London running many of the same strategy that Philly's running right now, especially with the solo support composition. So it's not like New York wasn't practicing against it. Maybe they just decided they weren't good enough to run those. It certainly looked like that day one where they came in and they were like, we are going to play this game our way because we think we can just overpower you by being so good at it. And they did play well on the first 2 maps, but it's very hard when the other team is playing a more meta-appropriate style.
Also, one quick note on New York as well is that the meta shifted to something where you're just less likely to get as many Zenyatta pickoffs. And I think this is one thing that sometimes goes under the radar. I mean, as much praise is thrown at it, but the reality is that throughout most of the regular season, JJoNak got as much praise as he did because you look at any NYXL fight, or any map rather, and the amount of fights that they end up winning because JJoNak gets an early pickoff, which has incredible ripple effects on ult economy, how you can engage, how many resources you have to spend, etc. Suddenly you go into a meta where you're less likely to have Zenyatta get those early pickoffs, less likely to get free fights, and suddenly you have to be playing with the sort of ult economy game that everyone else has kind of been stuck playing with the entire season. So I don't think that really helped.
But that's why all these teams have moved over to solo healer comps, because it's so much harder for these Zens when you're up against double snipe, when you're up against aggressive tanks.
That's right.
You can't play around the shield because you're going to get aggressed upon by the front line tanks.
And you can't peek.
And you can't peek. You can't play the angles that you did in the past because you've got 2 snipers trying to kill you with ridiculous sight lines. So literally teams are like, we can't run Zen. Like it's literally useless to do it.
And even if you have a charged shot, right, it's a projectile, so it takes time. So if you're trying to like, obviously Hanzo has projectiles too, but I'm pretty sure they're faster. So it's like if both of you are peeking, you lose as Zenyatta basically, because the other guy can get around that corner much faster. So I agree. I mean, the setups aren't there, and it's very hard to deal at long range with a Hanzo and Widowmaker composition. And on top of that, when one of their support players is also playing Tracer and is all over your Zenyatta balls, like in the back line, so you're dealing with 2 snipers and a Tracer. That fucking sucks. Like, how do you be effective like that?
And this is
like
exactly
if you're in
why
a
I brought
Hollywood
up
movie and you are a hired goon, a faceless henchman who has an M16. Now, in the real world, an M16, fantastic weapon, much better than a pistol. But if the opponent in this particular scenario is the hero cop, his Glock, far superior weapon to yours, hits from much longer range, every bullet's a headshot, and it's faster. He's faster than actually your machine gun, believe it or not. I mean, one of those mysteries of life.
So this is why I also brought up eUnited earlier, because I think that as a team, getting addicted to your Zenyatta being way better than other Zens and getting early pickoffs can be one hell of a drug to actually get off of. Because if you remember, eUnited back last year in Contender Season 0, basically part of the reason why they were able to get #1 is at the time, Boombox was essentially JJoNak before JJoNak. He was doing far better than those Zenyatas and getting early
the OG JJoNak
before everyone else. And then by the time the next season rolled around, a month and a half later, people had adapted and realized, wait, now we know how Boombox is playing and sort of the angles he's going for, because this is back sort of at the beginning when people are learning how to deal with Zens sort of upping their game. eUnited suddenly doesn't get early Zen pickoffs every other fight, and their team actually just collapses after they don't have that to rely upon. So I do kind of draw some similarities between the two.
I mean, to be fair, in this, like when they lost the first series in this semi, the New York team, right? I was like, okay, that can happen. You know, the format's very forgiving. This is cool. They'll come back in the next one. It'll be epic. We'll go to 3. But as soon as they got to that third map, King's Row, which is basically their map. And think what, they had their 2 maps in a row. They had King's Row into Hanamura. I was like, right, this is it.
They had one
Here's
loss between those 2 maps. One.
So as soon as they get fucking murked on King's Row, I was like, well, I'm all out on this one, so I've given up on this.
Yeah, basically I was too. I was like, okay, well, even if they could win this best of 5, like I don't think they can win one if they're just going to get. I mean, they got wrecked. It was something like 54 eliminations for Philly on that map and 8 for NYXL. They did, like, NYXL never won a fight on offense or defense. Like, it was terrible. They played really bad.
Is it just the meta? Is that a big contributing factor? Like, if we'd have had all the same issues for NYXL, fucked around in stage 4, didn't play a first round match, so you're coming in as like a black box, you could be super good, who no one knows what level you're at. But it had been the same meta as, like, let's say stage 2 or stage 3. Would it have been different?
It's impossible to tell, almost.
It's actually just a speculation, hypothetical question.
I want to say yes. I want to say yes, the same thing would have happened, purely because I don't believe that it was. I think this was something like, I think this was team mentality. That's like the only thing I can think, because previously, have they adapted quickly? Yes. Have they had like tailored strategies to their opponents they've been able to easily execute? Yes. Do they have hero pools that encompasses all of the heroes they needed to play to win this semifinal and to win the league? Yes. So it has to be exhaustion. It has to be, that's the only thing that makes sense.
You want to hear my personal theory on it?
Come on.
Yeah, let's go. What's your conspiracy theory?
These better be provable, though. It has to be absolute
these
fact,
gamers. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's only speculation for him. But
okay, right.
My personal theory is that New York, these guys, they're tired. They said they were tired. They're getting burnt out, right? You don't want to push your players too hard when you're coming to the end of the race, especially when they've locked in that number 1 seed. You've deserved a bit of rest. And the players, they're playing Minecraft for 12 hours a day. They're doing all this and the other. And they get a bit of taste of freedom. They get a taste of what it's like to be free of the scrims and the worrying about the Overwatch. And then when they have to go back to normalcy, which is scrimming and practicing and getting in the playoff mindset, they're just not there, because they're thinking about how to reach the Endermen or whatever. I don't know what Minecraft is, but they're not, their heads aren't in the game. They're in a completely different world, because they essentially they were in a winning mentality. They've gone out into like just relaxing. We've had a couple of weeks off or whatever. And now they've had to jump straight back in, and they've got to prep for these matches. And maybe, if I was New York Excel as well, I would probably be underestimating my opponents. Because if you were so far ahead of everyone else in the entire league, in terms of map differential, in terms of your win rates on a lot of these maps, and you're the best, I would be coming into this with a little bit of arrogance as well, and not worrying as much about some of these teams, especially if I had to play against a team like Philadelphia, where in the past they've been very shaky, inconsistent. Sort of their win condition.
You killed them 4-0 in 4, like you absolutely
precisely
in your last matchup.
You have fantastic records against a lot of these teams that you're potentially going to be playing against. So if I was New York, I'd be like, whatever. It's all good. It's a little bit more relaxed. And I think that mentality as well has an effect on you as well when you're coming into these matches. You don't take it as seriously.
So I'll say actually agree.
I've got a hypothetical. Oh, go on then. If you're going to tag on that, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually agree with pretty much everything Bren just said there. Where I think once you're in the zone, it's actually to put yourself back in, and after you take yourself out, especially after a long season where I think mentality was pretty rough. I will say, though, to your original question about the ideas, I would have been better if it was in basically the meta of an earlier stage. I still say I think it would have been better for NYXL, and that's merely because when you talk to players around the league, general perception Jonak from some was as high as Jonak is twice as good as the next competing Zenyatta. And just inherently, the meta we are in is one where you don't get as many crazy plays out of a Zen, or you're not even running Zen quite as much. Inherently, that's going to hurt NYXL because you're de facto nerfing their best player. Even if he's playing well in the other heroes that he's playing, the level of difference he had on that particular hero relative to other players was so great that it can't help but hurt NYXL in that situation where you're just like making them play in a meta where that hero is less impactful by comparison and is less played.
Right, here's my speculative theory, okay? So, you remember when there was that, like, VOD where within it, it was like the NYXL coaching staff or something, and there was that link in it, and then when people downloaded it, it was like part of a scouting report that, like, Wizard Young was having made, where someone had, like, tracked, like, how many defense matrices someone had done, something weird like that. I remember there was, like, a bizarre link, and it actually worked. Somehow it wasn't, like, a, private, protected link that you needed a password for, and people were actually able to access this, and this is something we talked about on another show I did, where we like speculated, like, was that purposely, like, to build up the mystique of Wizard Young? Because the idea is, it's like to put the fear of God in the other coaches. They're like, holy shit, he's going to this level. So what happened was, right, he was coming into the situation where his team hasn't played in ages. They haven't played properly in like over a stage and a half or so. He's thinking like, right, I've got to really nail this. And then he gets like sort of someone comes to him and says, it's like, I can't reveal my like they meet him in a parking lot with a fucking raincoat on and a trilby and everything. They go, it's like, I can't reveal who I am, but I've got information that can help you in this match. And then he tells him like, oh, go to this YouTube link, and it's like an unlisted video, and he goes there. And it's the same scenario. There's a VOD of like the Philly team playing, and there's like a link up there, and he clicks on it. I go, oh my god, it's downloading a document. He's like, right, I've got. Better put as much as this I can in, but obviously don't tell my players where I got it from, you know, like I'll make it out like it came from me and my data slaves, like the whole system I've got there. So he uploads his data, he uploads his analysis to all of his players, you know, and then he's coming in the first day for the matches, and he's like, right, feeling confident here, got some stuff to hit them with. And then a guy walks up to him and he says like, oh, so did you watch that VOD? And he goes like, who are you? Like, he goes, oh, I'm an analyst for Philadelphia Fusion. And he goes, that was you? And then all of a sudden one of his data slaves is like, the data is corrupted, it's a malware, it's making everything run worse. And then it's all went to shit at that point. So in the end, it was downloading that killed the beast.
There you go.
So
we now have all formula.
No, that was real, by the way, Bren. That was also just speculation.
I'd love to see, but after that, no, I'd love to see a Photoshop of the Independence Day scene where they're flying into the mothership. Kirby is just flying in there, and he's got his MacBook out, and he's like plugging it into this alien technology, and he's uploaded a virus. You know, I'd love to see a scene like that.
That's good. That's good. Nice time.
That's good.
Excellent.
What about this then? So, as we did with Boston, New York has been eliminated now. Right, coming into the playoffs, as we alluded to, the crazy thing about the Boston team was they were the best team in every stage except the last one, where no one really knows if they were fully engaged. And their team was so deep and so versatile that even with this big meta switch, everyone thought, well, ideal. If anything, they'll just continue on, be amazing. Are they a team you think they should do anything? Should they just stick with the whole roster and not consider any changes?
Well, I think if you look at the XL2 squad, the one player that they should definitely add, just one of the most ridiculous hit scan players in the game, is you add Nene to the roster at some point. Now, who you end up cutting for that, I mean, that depends on performance, but I think
you would cut anybody because they only have, what, 8 players on the roster.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, if in terms of that depth, then yeah, I mean, just please add Nene to the roster because he's playing out of his mind. Just it's extra depth at the hit scan level, might be more consistent than Pine in the long run. But I will tell you this, is that if XL2 doesn't sign him off their own contenders team, then what's going to result is that some other team is going to sign him and get very, very good as a result. So if nothing else, they add him to the roster.
Okay.
I mean, they also have Flower. So
I would remove
Flower has not been playing well so far. Like I know that he's waiting in the wings, but so far Flower's been like season 1 contenders. He wasn't playing very well. In season 2, he's been getting consistently outperformed by Mangachu thus far. Now,
I would remove Janus. I would also replace Libero with a more consistent flex DPS player if there's any available. I don't follow enough of the Korean contenders to know if there's any available talent out there, but I think Libero's just been consistently average, which sometimes that's what you need. You know, you don't need a flashy player. You just need someone who's going to perform every game. But yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the weakest link for that squad, it's always been Libero for me, Libero and Janus.
So, okay, since you referenced that, like, some historical aspect, obviously, every time NYXL ever loses, it resurrects an old meme, which goes, remember that team called LW Blue? Because if you used to watch Apex, it was a team, it was really skilled, actually, as well, this team. It had this player called Pine and a player called Sabiel B, had a player called Mako, Janus. They even had that Flower guy you were referring to. And the thing about this team was, you're thinking to yourself, that sounds like the Korean All-Star team must be fucking amazing, right? No, because every time they got to a playoff type scenario, they shit the bed. So is there something in the DNA of this team?
Like something crazy would happen, like Jonas's lung would collapse and he wouldn't be able to play in like a semifinal or something like that. So it wasn't always that they choked. It was sometimes that like acts of God happened. Yeah. So
but I have noticed in teams, and this applies to many team esports, that teams that have issues where they underperform in playoff settings or they do choke in a big match. It does seem to be like part of the character of some of the players who are in the court, and it does tend to actually carry on. Like oftentimes that becomes the narrative that they have to try and overcome, and will plague them many times. Think of like the Rocks Tigers teams in League of Legends. We've had numerous teams that have done this. In CS, we have a team who's actually number one now, Astralis, who's done it many times. When they've been the number one team is when they lose the big match where they're supposed to win that tournament. So do you think there's anything about the makeup of the team? I mean, obviously in this setting, this is the only real playoffs that they actually played in. The rest were the stage ones, so it's hard to know how that weighs up.
No, I don't think they choked. I mean, from watching them play, they weren't playing bad. It just they like we said earlier, like they didn't understand what compositions to really run, or they weren't comfortable.
They didn't look like they wanted to win, frankly.
Yes, yeah. That's your earlier point where you were saying they looked tired, but they weren't playing like they weren't particularly disjointed. It was just they were uncomfortable running what was at the time, well, right now, the meta essentially, and that's really where I pin a lot of the downfall of that team on. Well, I mean, I guess it's fun for the memes if you want to say, "Oh, LW Blue, the choke and the curse continues." You know, you can always say.
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I'm not sure how much stock I put into the idea of like, okay, they're can't end up doing this. Ironically, not even trying to throw it back here, but it reminds me of, there was the entire thing back in the days like, eUnited's always getting second. Can they ever win? And it's like, I don't think they were cursed either. I think it's just, for whatever reason, you have circumstances where a team just ends up falling short. I don't think there's a particular, holy shit, we're specifically going to, get knocked out right before playoffs after doing well in the regular season.
All roads lead back to eUnited with you, don't they, ZP?
I don't know why
the central point of your philosophy.
I knew I was going to get called out by you for saying that, but that's also the other notable team in Overwatch that got second every tournament ever.
But at the same time, there are players and there are through lines like about players like Prey and Gorilla who have been on a shocking number of teams in League of Legends that have choked at international events. Yeah. So at a certain point, like the pattern, it does fit.
Yeah.
And maybe it's one of those things where obviously, Pine was on LW Red. Part of it is a joke. That's true. Only like Jonas, Mecco, Sabilby, these type of guys were on LW Blue.
Pine went over on the season 3.
Yeah, he did sometimes.
When they made the super team, if you remember.
Yeah, he did. So there were different times when this happened. They also mixed the rosters and did win IEM Gyeonggi. That was like their first major tournament win as an organization. But that was a one-weekend tournament, and that's the only thing they've won. I think we have a question is at the end of a long Apex season or at the end of a long Overwatch League season, maybe these guys don't have the best stamina to keep playing after months and months and months and months. We have to have that question, I think.
Okay. Right, let's go over to the other side of the bracket then, because one of the interesting aspects of the bracket is obviously that it was also based on which seeds win in the first round. But many people had speculated Philadelphia is probably going to beat Boston, therefore it would be the Philadelphia NYXL and whoever wins out of Gladiator Spitfire versus Valiant. So in the Gladiator Spitfire matchup, this is one where obviously Spitfire had huge problems in those last stages. Like they had times where they looked terrible despite the fact that, as I always used to bring this contrast up, the difference between Spitfire and Seoul, the two Korean teams that weren't doing well, is that by the end, you even looked at the Seoul lineup and you were like, actually, a lot of these players, even the name values degraded, it's not that crazy a lineup. I guess fair enough that they didn't do well. Whereas you looked at the Spitfire lineup, even to the bitter end, and you were like, these have some of the best players in the league. These are some amazing, but how are they not doing better? So it's all well and good now for people to believe in Spitfire, and they always could have done. How did this happen? How did they beat the Gladiators and then go on this epic run?
This is unbelievable, right? Because after that first match on the Gladiators, when they got 3-0'd against iRemix in the Gladiator squad, I looked at it.
Legend.
Like, this team's fucking done. I was like, what the fuck is this? And me and Sideshow, we watched the scrims at London, and they weren't playing bad, but they weren't playing good either. It was somewhere just above bad, a little bit below average, just in the middle. And it wasn't fantastic. From what I saw, they were struggling to coordinate a lot of ultimates. They just looked like out of sorts completely. And then from that first match to the second, the only change they made was removing Closer and putting Nuss in. and that apparently just completely revamped the team because they started playing.
I don't think it was that.
I don't think.
Whatever changes were there? Because when we were watching the scrims, they were playing like not the team like they are now. This actually has really shaken.
What do you think the knock-on effect was of changing the support in that sense? What would you?
It must be the calling structure, because it must be the calling structure, because Badosin is their main call. I believe that they gestured call some of the fights as well, and I think were normally assists in the calling aspect. So the only thing it's made changes that we cannot actually tell because we're not in the comms, or we don't know the history of the team. We haven't been following them as they've been scrimming. But I would speculate that it's something to do with the calling structure, and they've changed something up there, and it's just completely had ridiculous ramifications across the entire team as a whole that's caused them gone this absolute mad one. It's actually ridiculous, honestly, though. If you really just reflect on this, once he's shaking his head, I can't believe it. Because I don't know what to believe anymore.
Look, I mean, how many times? I mean, Thorin, how many times have I said London can be the best team? It's just like they don't have the compositional swaps that they need. They don't have the shot calling in game. It
was mainly coaching issues that we tagged it on, right?
Yeah, and I think that, but now that when they came back against the Gladiators, they had a brilliant game plan. And so I think you have to say that perhaps it wasn't the coach's strategy that was bad. Maybe it was their ability to get the players in the map to implement this strategy that was bad. Like, were they unable to train their players to make the right swaps? Because now they're making all the right swaps. When they came in against the Gladiators on day 2, they were playing so aggressively, like, everything looked different. They were fighting them at their spawn on like escort maps, just like in their face the entire time. And why this is an effective strategy is that if you can force iRemix to play Winston, which is his worst tank, he will jump in. He uses his cooldowns very early. And at that point, there was always Birdring on the flank who is like just one-shotting Big Goose, right? It was a great strategy that basically punished Gladiators as they were approaching objectives. They're stringing themselves out and leaving their supports unprotected, and they were just getting dumpstered. So that was a great change. But I think with London, I like New York, I think it's a mentality thing. Talking to London's players and talking to London's like coaches and management, they expected to lose in the second day against Gladiators. No one, including London, thought they were going to win.
Because I didn't know how much I wanted to leak, but that I also knew that, and it's so weird, right? A mentality thing like that. They went into the game expecting to lose. How crazy is it? And then they just literally dumpster them. It's madness.
Let's link this all together. Is that you touched on the key point that I wanted to bring out, was the idea is that they're really aggressive, and one thing you see is that when you have nothing to lose, you're not really worried about, hey, I'm at position, get picked off. Oh no, what's going to happen? It's sort of like, well, we're going to lose no matter what. You know, you almost get an element that's just like, all right, go deeper. Why not? Let's be more aggressive. And to your point, which I think was a very good one about iRemix, is that iRemix, in the past and, previous iterations that we've seen him play, is that he is vulnerable to getting picked off early, especially if you force him on the Winston. So you sort of had this moment where you've put London in a situation where London feels, okay, we have nothing to lose. Let's just play more aggressive. Let's go at it. I mean, no matter what, we're probably going home today. So why not? And then the sort of the mentality shift where you've effectively removed stress from all the players at this point, because they've already made peace with the fact that they're going to lose, has somehow become the impetus for them to make a huge turnaround and win. So it's just ridiculous how this all came about.
Exactly. And I don't know what it was. Their coaches obviously had a very good Gladiators and Valiant. And they may have just suddenly clicked into this meta. And like you're saying, without the pressure there, maybe that's when they said, okay, we're going to try and implement our coach's strategies in this game. Or they just said, fuck it, let's play aggressive like we were at the end of the season. Stop being scared bitches.
That's what you need to do in this meta.
Yeah. And I think that really worked for them, because they were playing scared their first match against the Gladiators. And they played with no fear in their second series, and they played with no fear against the Valiant. And they allowed their very good aggressive style to come back. They actually started making the compositional changes, which they hadn't been doing all season. And it seems so weird because obviously many of us thought Gladiators are going to win, especially after that first day, because my logic is, London can be the best team in this league, but if they haven't figured out how to switch comps in game and react over the last 4 months, why the fuck would they learn how to do it suddenly right now before the or during the playoff window? And then after they get dumpstered by the Gladiators on Wednesday, at that point they only have 2 days to figure out how to switch comps. And apparently in those 2 days, that was it. Like it finally just magically clicked. It's just
and to be clear too, like mentality with players, and this is something that you get when you talk to players and otherwise, that it's very possible. If you're worried about how you're going to look, if you're worried about how play is going to be perceived, players will hold themselves back where they have a gut feel is like, this might be the right play, but it's going to look really stupid if I do this in feed. And players oftentimes, because of anxiety over making decisions that will be seen really bad if they don't work out, won't go with it. But you suddenly put the players in an environment where it's just like, well, no matter what, we're losing. Doesn't really matter. It can't get worse than the last time we played. Suddenly they're more willing to take that risk because in their minds it doesn't matter anymore. And then wait, they're actually giving into instincts that are pretty good.
Yeah.
If only they'd had a player on the roster of the LA Gladiators who could play Winston, was sort of a motherfucking legend in playoff series and had sort of the winner's mentality to overcome any problems and play aggressively but be a maestro at doing so. If only that had been the case. Come on, man. How can we not? How has no one said the word Fisher yet?
That's not fair, though. Where would you find such a...
Yeah. Where would you find an MVP candidate, the only MVP tank candidate in the league? So I want to hear your take on this, Thorin, because I haven't read anything from your Twitter about this, I don't think, or like seen you make any content on it. So what's your take on the Fissure benching? Have you kept abreast of the entire like drama saga?
Right, first of all, I'll tell you a general principle that applies throughout esports. No one in the history of esports, in the era when you have real managers, coaches, GMs, etc., not in the era when it's just, 5 players playing Counter-Strike 10 years ago, no one has ever benched themselves. That doesn't exist. That means that that's like the person who goes, well, oh, what happened to you and your girlfriend? Oh, mutual breakup. Yeah, we were going in different directions. Oh, really? What's she doing? And then it's always like, oh, she's moved back to her home. Oh, so it was her, but who did the breakup then? Okay, now I understand. Mutual just means you've accepted it and you're not challenging the fact. So that tells me that there must be some ridiculous problems going on in this team, because otherwise, like, I realize, yes, a lot of people have been affected by burnout and a lot of people can't handle how long the season was. But the idea that coming into this, like, very winnable playoff series, not one that's like an opponent that's definitely going to beat you. The idea that they just say, fuck it, right before the playoffs, when they have a chance to go deep, is ridiculous to me. Like, that beggars belief that it's a legit thing of like, oh, it was just I want to be in a team that's all Korean. They should pick someone else. This is actually, it's when you can always tell when it's a lie, Monty, when they do the classic mistake, which is if it had really been a scenario where you wanted to bench yourself, like, you wouldn't then also do the bullshit part of like, you over egg the pudding. Like, I actually think they're going to be better without me. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, that is ridiculous. That
no pro player thinks that way, by the way.
That's almost like you're trying to set the team up so that when they lose, you're like, oh, I thought you guys were going to be better without me. Oh, what happened? Oh, do you sort of need me, don't you? Oh, it's nice to feel needed anyway, wanted, Come on, man. There's something going on there.
Well, especially when you're so obviously, like, simultaneously trying to say that Remix is the better player. Well,
no,
on the other side, you're saying, okay, there's several aspects to this. First off, it was like an aggressive tank won't work, or like a defensive tank is better.
He was right about that in a sense.
No, not in the sense he meant it, though. But if you actually look at how this meta's evolved and how well, like, London is doing by playing aggressively into their snipers, I think that's just straight up wrong. I think you have Fissure, like, trying to shut down snipers, and he's probably one of the best players to do that in the league. So I think that's a misread on the meta, number one. Number two, when you're simultaneously saying, you know what, I think teams are just better with, all Korean or all English speaking lineups, the communication so much easier. It's clear that he's saying, please, Seoul, sign me, take me away.
I mean, now. Philly was going, I don't know what you mean, mate. It seems fine for us. We're loving it. What are you talking about?
We have players from 9 different countries. Sometimes, like, literally, sometimes when I'm at Philly's house watching them scrim, I can't even understand what they're saying because there's so many different accents in their comms. It's really hard to, like, have your brain, like, switch gears to the way everybody is pronouncing these words differently. Yeah. It's crazy.
How many different ways can you pronounce monkey as they focus?
Exactly. But they've gotten used to each other now, and it seems to be working great. But yeah, I just like, it was too much posturing from Fissure saying like, you know, this issue is just crap. Like
Like if I had to guess, okay, if I speculated, I would say something along the line. Obviously, I have no inside information on this, but this isn't like informed by some like leak that someone's given me. I would speculate something happened, like they had an argument over how they should play, or maybe a sub that was going to play, and then in this scenario, Fissure didn't get his way, and he was like, right, you know, bearing in mind like the last stage didn't go that well. He was like, right, this is it, I'm done. Fuck this, like you know, we should go. It's like the passive aggressive thing. Like, yeah, I should move on. You should do a different thing. Because the thing is, if you really believed in this team and you really thought that you had a chance to win, you're the best player. You're the fucking captain. Like the one thing you don't do is bench yourself, right? And the idea that the team would want that, like I know a lot of teams in the modern day think the approach to management is like, if someone misbehaves, bench them. It's like certain players you cannot do that with. You can do that in a sports team because you've got so many other players. And even then, if it's like LeBron benching himself,
you're going to bench LeBron.
You got to get him back on the court, haven't you? You can't just go, well, no problem, we'll use our backup. Like in this scenario, they just killed the team.
The other thing too is that, I mean, you take a look at the amount that Fissure was using social media, right? No one's using social media that once if they're happy and content with the decision that was made. I mean, yeah, you can make the argument of, oh, he's just responding to all the other people that were talking about stuff. It's like, no, I think clearly he was trying to express discontent without actually doing so. I mean, it was weird, but it was very much the hallmark signs of a very frustrated player who definitely wanted to play in the playoffs. I mean, how could you not?
Well, I actually think he didn't. I think he was hoping. I think the best case scenario for Fissure. So be Fissure. He clearly wants to leave this team. He clearly wants to go to an all-Korean roster. He's not going to go to New York. He's not going to London because they already have great tanks. And London literally made the decision to trade him and keep Gesture. So not going to reverse that one, especially not when they're the favorites to win the final. So what do you do if you're Fissure? You start making overtures about going to Seoul or going to perhaps an expansion Korean team or all Korean roster. You know, that's great for you. But the best thing for Fissure would be if they won with iRemix, because then Gladiators thinks, maybe we don't need Fissure after all. We've got a great system where our strategy and coaching are carrying the day. Remix, to his credit, did look much improved. You know, I don't want this to turn into some sort of like shitting on Remix because this was all outside of his control. And it looks like
he played this in, you know, for a few stages. So fair enough.
Yeah, and he legitimately looked better than we saw him in stage one. So credit to Remix for his improvement. But if you're Fissure, you're thinking, hey, maybe, you know, if we win, I can prove that they don't need me. Therefore, my goal of getting traded to an all-Korean roster is much more likely to happen, right? The problem is if and the coaching staff too, the Gladiators, they look brilliant. The problem is if they play Remix and lose, what happens is you're basically saying to the entire league, hey, Fissure did something that was so bad that we took out our star player in the playoffs, which also means that his trade value decreases because you don't have any leverage anymore. Like if I'm Seoul and coming to the Gladiators, I'm like, and I want Fissure, I'm going to be like, you don't want Fissure. It's clear you don't. You don't want to play him. You're going to trade him. Otherwise, you would have just played him in the playoffs, raised his trade value to the maximum possible degree, and then gotten rid of him. So you lost negotiating power if you were the Gladiators.
Also, I don't know if you're aware of this, Fissure. Like, I know you don't obviously have American system style franchise sports over in Korea in the same way. Like, it's not a massive thing. Sports aren't as big a deal there. So just think about this for a second. You are under contract, mate. Like, oh, this just happened in the League of Legends, actually. In the LCS, we had another player who's one of the best in the league, which is Meteos, the star jungler of 100 Thieves, right? And basically, due to some issues with how the meta was going, they were telling him, like, you know, we might have to bench you for a while, or it's not, and he wasn't liking the environment of the team. So he went to the team and requested a trade, basically. Now,
this is actually hilarious.
There was a lot of communication problems, unfortunately, between him and the team, because obviously, since he's like literally one of the best at his role, when he said, I want to trade trade, he means I want to trade to a good team and be a starter on that team. Now, they just said, like, you know, be careful what you wish for, because they traded him to a dogshit team who isn't even starting him. So he's in the worst of all scenarios. So, Fisher, here's the problem, homie. How did you end up on the Gladiators in the first place? Jack Etienne minted fucking G, as you've now seen, when I've got one of the best teams in the league, and I've got a second tank who's fucking baller. Shall I sell him to a really good... Nah, I think I'll sell him to that Gladiators team who's all reamed out with like half the players are going nowhere. Sell him to them, get the max value, because they're not going to be a threat, are they? I mean, little did he know, coming back, you ended up helping him out, mate. You were the sleeper agent all along. You just fucking activated the Manchurian candidate. You lost your shit. He probably just messaged you the night before the scrims, like, you know what, whatever's going on in that team, it's fucked up. You should just listen to you. You're the best. And then he was like,
the Korean candidate.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the point I'm making here is, like, why would they sell you to a really good Korean team? If I'm that, I'd go, you know what, Fisher, I will oblige you. Enjoy your time on the Shanghai Dragons. Goodbye. And the deal's been done.
Yeah, and that might happen to him. That might well happen to him, you know. But yeah, this whole thing, I think it was really transparent in how it went down. I think we know there was some sort of internal conflict between Fisher and the rest of the team. How bad it was, how right Fisher was, how wrong he was, we don't know the answer to that. If we believe Slasher's tweet, it seems like Fisher was unhappy with his teammates' practice, work ethic. I don't know if that's true. That's not something that I've heard myself, but doesn't mean it's not true. If that's the case and he flipped out at them, maybe the coaches thought they had to step in. But the wrong thing to do, if that statement is true, the wrong thing to do is like punish the guy who wants to practice more. What the fuck is that? You know what I mean?
Certainly an interesting precedent to set. Like he's just there alone in the practice room. He's calling all the coaches, where are they all? They're not here, the fucking arseholes. And they go, listen, that's really unacceptable. Like, if you're going to stay up really late practicing all night and then diss your teammates who are in bed or drunk right now, that's a disgrace. You're out the team. We've got a team culture to protect here, and we're not going to accept players like you. Like, come on, man, what is this?
Yeah. So I don't know if that's true or not. If it is true, I do find the reaction to it somewhat ridiculous, even if Fisher did make a scene. Could be something else entirely. It clearly wasn't anything that the league itself is going to sanction him on. So it's just like an interpersonal conflict, clearly, that isn't terrible. So yeah, I just don't understand like why you would do that, why you would make that decision. And for Fisher, like he's in a very precarious position now, because it's abundantly clear that the Gladiators are not going to want to retain him, and where he goes is not really in his own power. So, but the only way he starts making kind of comments is that he's obviously signaling certain teams to start trying to trade for him.
The part I would say was coaching malpractice, though, regardless, like, even if there was a good reason to go, okay, we're going to go with iRemix, the part that didn't make any sense to me was the part where he's not even at the arena during the second set of games.
That's
where
how you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly evidence that some shit went down. But on the same note, it's like, even if shit went down, from a pure personnel perspective, you need to keep your options open. Like, look, for all we know, iRemix like suffers some like catastrophic injury on the way to the arena and suddenly like cannot play. Like, physical injury, like just trips and like breaks his face or something on the way there.
Just like, if he dies, he dies. Hang on.
Yeah, Fisher goes all Ivan Drago. Yeah, but I mean, realistically speaking, you should at least have him at the arena. The part where he's not even at the arena is the part that is not.
That tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, it does.
You would think, you would think that. You would think, worst case scenario, that the way Fisher would show he still wants to be part of the org is he'd pull a fucking Eagles scenario where it's like, right, I'm going to be like the Carson Wentz to Nick Foles, like giving him the players like, listen, maybe do this next time, giving him some insight, you know, talking him up. You're going to do great in this game, baby. Instead, he's like, iRemix is like, are we going to do that sort of setup? He's like, delete my number. I'll be only answering calls in Korean from now on. I don't speak English anymore. Little English, goodbye. Well, here's the thing, though. It does obviously set up a really sexy potential trade bit, because if an expansion team comes in next year and they sign one of the really good Korean teams, so Element Mystic, X6 Gaming, Runaway, all these teams, as long as they don't think he's an arsehole as a person, surely all these teams would jump to get a player like Fisher.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a veteran of several years now. He's maybe the best tank player in the world. He's a playmaker. He's an in-game leader. He's a hard worker. He might be a jerk, but I'm sure you'll appreciate this, Thorin. Like, Kobe, famously, like an asshole in practice, right?
Well, actually, this is the
so
thing.
was Jordan.
For me,
Kobe was as well.
He's one of the players where, like, I know people don't like that because if you want to present like a family-friendly image for the league, you have to tell everyone all the bullshit. Like, we're all best friends in all these teams, and we believe everyone is equal and all this. Like, obviously, clearly, that's not the way. Like a sports team is a literal hierarchy. Obviously, you have certain people get more attention, focus, get comms hierarchy. Their word goes first, you know. And in this scenario, like for me, if you look at the difference with Fisher in the team and without the team, and when they had their best wins, it's clear that as much as he may be incredibly demanding, his way to play the game wins the fucking game. So there've been many players in numerous games. Actually, there was a guy in Dota 2 who's like this guy, PPD, who played for Evil Genius.
Oh, yes.
His own teammates used to actively despise him and be like, this guy's so hard to work with. But I tell you what, as soon as he would leave the team, or they'd go and have a bad result in another team, they were started to look back fondly on those days where they were in the final every fucking time. They're in top 4 every time, compete for the championship every time. Because when you've got someone who's an asshole who really, like, here's the problem. Interviews have been so saturated by the bad players learning the vernacular of champions. So they all tell you, like, the worst team in the league will be like, our goal is to win the league. Winning is everything to us. Like, but that means nothing because the person who's a champion says that as a result of having given up everything in his life, going as hard as possible, like trying everything within his style to perfect it. That's what then makes him say a comment like, winning's all that matters to me. Because the point is that guy really wouldn't care if he came second and had a good game, you know. It's like he's given everything up. So as much as I could absolutely believe he's probably a hard teammate to deal with, especially, by the way, I would guess for Westerners. Like we've seen this with effect in Dallas Fuel. The guys who were the super dedicated Koreans don't particularly appreciate it if you're some Western guy who's just like, this is my dedicated practice. I'm just going to go watch fucking Star Wars: The Last Jedi now or something. He's like, you know, they're not down for that. That's not cool with them. Believe
Especially
it or
with that movie.
And don't get suckered in by all the quiet Koreans who just don't speak English much. You go, they're such a polite culture. Yeah, try fucking up within a hierarchy in a Korean team. See how it goes for you, mate. It won't end well, put it that way. Of course, the fact his name is Fisher, and he did just rip a massive hole into the centre of this team. You know, just poetic, isn't it? Life's got a weird way of working out, Monty. So, okay, let's then talk about the other semi-final. So, obviously, we had the London Spitfire. They come through. They get to the other semis. At this point in time, people are just thinking, great, now we can have that Spitfire NYXL final in New York. It's going to be so great. So, look. You know, first part worked out with the Spitfire. What happened here? Because if you remember, I'm trying to think who it was who we had who said this, but most people did buy into the narrative that like NYXL is the best team in the Overwatch League. And you know, yeah, Valiant's won all these games and they've done so well, but I'm not fully on board with it. Coming into at this point in time, Valiant should be a big favourite, right, Bren?
In hindsight, yeah. In hindsight, I was also on the New York Excel train before I watched them shit the bed. But Valiant as well. Now I look back and I'm like, this team on paper should have been winning, right? Because especially in the meta that we're in,
like, you know,
the
like
solo support.
The big problem is this, right? I totally get it why people looked at NYXL and thought, oh, come on, they're so good, they can get it together. I know why people even thought Spitfire is a great ceiling, but it's like the problem is that is like potential versus what you have now. And as unsexy as Valiant may be, they were doing that every game and they were fucking really good.
When I look at Valiant versus London as a team, just in the individual matchups, I'd say London's got a better DPS pair. I would say that Valiant have a better tank pair. Honestly, Fate and Space are unbelievable, but they didn't play up to the same standards that I would hold them to in their match against London. And Gesture and Fury had a ridiculous match themselves. But Valiant, I really don't know. This should have been their playoffs. Honestly, they should be in the finals on paper because you look at Kareev. This guy used to play DPS now, and we're going into a meta where the Flex support player is moving over to DPS, right?
And
you'd expect him to start performing, and he was getting destroyed by Badosin. Badosin, mate, I think he was a DPS player in another life because he was absolutely ruining them. It was ridiculous.
Fun story about Badosin. Thorin, I don't know if you know this. Do you know that he used to play League and he was rookie's backup mid laner, like bench mid laner on IG. Yeah, in China. So super interesting. Anyway, but yeah,
which by the way, mid lane is a pretty mechanical role.
Yes,
it's not in any way like a fun supportive role, like support or jungler or whatever, you know.
I also just think Bedosian, like we were talking about this. We were out at like for dinner and drinks after the match for London on Friday, all the casters, and we had this conversation that I brought up, which is if London wins, like it keeps doing well in these playoffs, who is the playoff MVP from London? And it's really hard to pick right now because for Bedosian, you have a guy who in this meta can play every map. So he's not like Philadelphia who have, if they want to play very well with a single healer, they have to go Poco and Hotbot together. Bedosian can be in every map. He was the second best Zenyatta player in the league, and he's got a great Roadhog. And he can play that Tracer and win those Tracer duels and like shut down the enemy sniper like he did against Surefour and Soon, sort of zoning them out. So you have this guy who in this playoff, in this meta, has been asked to step up in a major way and shot call at the same time. Crazy. Massive, like great performance. You also have Gesture, who's playing out of his mind. You also have Prophet, who has been absolutely
young,
nuts.
up-and-coming player hoping one day to be an all-star.
Such.
Got that one in there, the big gumbo.
My opinion on this, though, if we're talking about an MVP when it comes to London, or if London win it, I keep putting Fury's name forward, but this is only because I have the belief that the most important player in the game right now is the D.Va player. Because so many of these fights are decided whether or not you can get off a Halt from the Orisa, a Halt Dragon Strike combo and get 1 or 2 picks. Dragon Strikes are especially important because you build them so quickly. How you utilize them is if you can use their zone denial to split up an enemy team and focus down a certain section, or even just get a couple of kills like when you're coordinating with your main tank player, that's fantastic. So D.Va is a ridiculously important role right now in terms of you have to eat the Halts up. You have to delete the Halts of your defense matrix. If you can delete a Dragon Strike, suddenly your chances of winning a team fight just go up astronomically. So in my opinion, the D.Va is one of these roles. Now, I also speak to a lot of pro players, and they say that the main tank is the most important role because you kind of have to know when to use your Halts and have that sort of mindset. But in my opinion, it's all about these off-tank players, because often it's very difficult to tell when somebody is playing it well. But if you really pay attention to what they're doing and their cooldown usage and how much they use the defense matrix, because remember, defense matrix was nerfed at a certain point during the league, so it's much harder. A lot of off-tank players fell off the map because they couldn't adapt to it. So it's interesting to me as well, because I look at Fury and this guy has stepped it up in the playoffs because he can play all off-tank roles to a very high level, in my opinion.
So just to add on to that as well, D.Va sort of exerts pressure in regards to how players have to use these, right? Where the best example I can give you is an example of...
You keep going, it's back again.
What? Are we good?
Keep going, keep going, keep talking, keep talking.
We're continuing forward. Anyways, I think one of the better parts about D.Va 2 in terms of like the effect on the game is that look at any situation where a team is running D.Va against the Zarya that has grab versus any situation where a team isn't running a D.Va for whatever reason is running Zarya. How the psychology changes of how they approach a fight where the Zarya just runs in, is like, oh, I'm just going to drop the grab wherever. I don't care. Nothing can stop me. Versus when you're up against a good D.Va and you've actually terrified the other team into when they can use these abilities, which forces mistakes, which forces them to really go the weird positioning because they have a lot of respect for the other D.Va player. It has all these ripple effects on the game, essentially.
Yeah.
Right, so okay, a topic we touched on earlier, but let's resurrect it then, was obviously when you look at the LA team, right, it's actually, despite what a fabulous team they were and how many games they won, they don't have the best DPS in the league. No, and obviously, soon as someone you need to pop off, you need to have a massive game, because Agilities is never going to be the best DPS player. He's never going to be like a superstar carry who's just so... Well,
he's still young, so let's give him a little bit of time.
Yeah, really good. Agilities actually... pre-OWL was super promising in regards to just being like super dominant. He's played well in OWL so far, and I think he's a player that could improve quite a bit over time.
So
he already has improved.
What was the issue?
It could improve even further. So
the issue was he got completely outperformed in terms of so they put Agilities onto the Hanzo, right? Because double sniper is all what people are mainly playing these days. And when you're up against Prophet, Prophet has been criminally underrated over the course of the entire Overwatch League in terms of like the stats he put out. The guy's not even in the All-Stars, the Overwatch League All-Stars.
He's probably, it's like him and EQ are flexible, largest hero pool players we have.
Yeah.
It's because, unfortunately, people took the logic of, like, because Spitfire as a team was losing, their players must be doing badly. Whereas, like, he probably was still the best DPS player, even at the time. He was fucking amazing.
Yeah, he's insane. And I did a little segment on the desk, just literally comparing the numbers. Super simple. But it was in their first match, Prophet had 8.6 final blows per 10 minutes compared to Agility's 3 on Hanzo alone. Like, Prophet was
pretty ridiculous.
Absolutely dominating. Like, it was crazy. And then when Birdring's playing well as on top of that, because Birdring as well, he can be quite a flaky player, but recently has been stepping up when he's shutting down Soon, forcing Soon to move the Tracer, like making them uncomfortable. As soon as Soon moves the Tracer, Prophet goes to Brigitte, a hero that he's also sick at. Like, everything just fell into place for him, and Valiant just seemed to crumble as a result of that.
Monte brought this up earlier, and I think it's worth knowing as well, is that the game plan was to make life for basically every member of their team. So, I mean, you have Soon, who generally, like, has done well in high-pressure situations, if you look at his track record in Overwatch and, like, final situations, but he was essentially running into obstacle after obstacle, even when he tried to get something going.
Yeah. I also think those numbers you're talking about, Bren, are somewhat pumped up because we have to talk about why we haven't really addressed why the Hanzo is good or why London is doing so well with the Hanzo. And he has a lot of final blows because the combos have been excellent. Like, how many times has he shot?
Yes.
So first off, he's charging Dragon Strikes like once per fight. It's actually crazy how fast he's charging. So he's outputting an insane amount of damage. That's helping him get the kills. So he's getting a lot more Dragon Strikes as well. What's happening during these Dragon Strikes? Oh, people are getting halted into them.
Yes,
so it's
right.
like,
that's
or Primal Rage, like Gesture is setting up Dragon Strike kills.
Absolutely.
So one of the successes with Hanzo has been that their combos as a team have been excellent. The other success that they've had with Hanzo is because they're building Dragon Strikes up so quickly, a lot of time they use them to engage. Watch how London does this. When we talk about them playing aggressively, Prophet will literally run towards the enemy team's spawn, hide behind a wall, wait for the other team to walk forward. Then what happens is he just fires a Dragon Strike perpendicular to them. So they're like walking in. Dragon Strike comes in this way. It will cut off the Widowmaker or the Zen player or the Mercy player. So their tanks are in front. The tanks can't get back. And then what happens is Gesture and Fury come in and they just shit on whoever is like on the other side of that Dragon Strike. So what they're doing is they're positioning very far in advance. They'll just throw out Dragon Strikes, not intending to get kills, but to separate the enemy team, make them really far apart from each other, and then they just dive the backline. And so these are the two ways that they're using Dragon Strike right now, and that it's been so amazingly effective.
I have another stat for you as well. Prophet has an average of 3 kills per Dragon Strike compared to 0.8.
That's ridiculous.
Ooh, for Agilities. 3 kills per Dragon Strike.
That's ridiculous.
Wow.
I mean, I would wonder there's like how often is, even taking that aside, that's still just a ridiculous stat line. I mean, that means that there's multiple moments where to get an average of 3, how many of those are like 4 or 5, etc. Even if set up, those are ridiculous swings in the actual team fight.
I mean, one of my other favorite things that teams have been doing right now is, so because it's double sniper, so a team will use their infra. So Widowmaker pops infrasight, right? Then Widowmaker starts peeking aggressively. So the defending team who doesn't have the infrasight, they know that they are seen. So what they do is they start like backing into a corner. So Widow just keeps taking wider angles. And then what happens is, like, once they're all clustered together, then the Dragon Strike just comes through the wall and kills them. Like, it's hilarious. So it's all like corralling them into the Dragon Strike as well.
But this also comes back to who knows where they're at that point. It's no secret, so we can take the absolute best angle. Like the combination of those two ultimates, it's actually quite good. Which is funny, given that Overwatch for the longest period of time, one of the biggest stigma of team comps was, oh shit, running double snipers, we throw.
Yeah. So Thorin, your original question though was like, so what about the DPS question? Between LA Valiant and Spitfire. But this is where it ties into the tanks as well, because I just thrown out Prophet getting three kills on average when it comes to the Dragon Strike efficiency. But this is down to, like you said, Monty, Gesture halting them into it. But a big part of why of the downfall of LA Valiant in that match was Space not playing as well and not up to the same standard. Now, you have to delete the halts, right, to prevent that from even happening. Now, Space is normally pretty good at that. In match against London, he underperformed in that regard. And it's a difficult ability to actually delete, because if they activate it too early, as in like if they use the halt too early and they right-click it, you can't eat it at all. So it needs to be traveling towards you. So it's a very difficult job for the D.Va player. Normally, he's been quite good at it. But it really all just sort of cascades into itself, where you've got essentially these issues causing other issues all over in the game. So it's these reasons as to why Valiant underperformed, in my opinion.
I do think there might have been a reason for that, though.
Who hasn't played in playoffs before.
Well, for Space, so I'd also give the idea that London was just dealing like ridiculous amounts of poking damage to begin with. So as a D.Va, if you end up taking an arrow directly to the D.Va headbox immediately in the fight, suddenly you're way lower HP. You're gonna the natural inclination is going to be, okay, I need to go a little bit further back. Suddenly you're more worried about survival. Then a halt comes in, and you're not in position to actually deal with it. So, I mean, credit has to be given there to London just for laying down enough poking damage to make Space get out of his comfort zone, where, sure, I mean, some of it still falls on Space, but also when you're focusing a D.Va fairly hard and forcing her to worry about staying in her mech, she's not going to be as prepared to actually get in on the halts.
Yeah. I have another interesting piece of information. So me and Sideshow, we went to the LA Valiant compound and interviewed the players and chatted with them. And one takeaway that I had was Space, essentially, this guy is very intelligent. One of the most intelligent players I've spoken to, because he individually ties a certain play style when it comes to Orisa to every main tank player. So he memorizes what the play style of the player he's going to be playing against and their Orisa style and how they use halts. So because some Orisa players do it too high, some do it lower, some use it at the start of a fight as soon as they place their shield. He knows all these mannerisms and tries to learn from it so he can best try and deny them of that. And when London completely changed their play style, essentially when they're just playing without fear, full-on aggressiveness, Space said, so his team, he always tells his team, play around as if I'm not going to eat this halt and we have to avoid the Dragon Strike. Always. So the team always positions themselves like that. But what they don't expect and don't anticipate from London, especially because these guys were scrim partners when London wasn't doing well in scrims beforehand, they've already got a read for how they play. They think they're going to be playing the same old passive style they were before. But now London don't give a fuck. They're just jumping straight in, mate. They're going full-on aggressive, balls to the walls. And it throws this team off guard because they're like, oh, we have to play passively so that we can disengage from the Dragon Strike combo. But they're aggressing into us. So they're like, it confuses them and the calls and how they actually play around it. So all in all, I mean, London were the better team. And I just thought it was fantastic Overwatch to see. But I'm a bit disappointed the fact that the Valiant underperformed.
I think when we talk about like the moment we knew Philly was going to win was when Thorin mentioned like
the Kings Row game.
The Kings Row game. Yeah. When I knew that London was going to win when we saw the first game of the second series and it was on Dorado. And that was the last game of the previous series. And then London did exactly the same thing. And they still got caught up by the halt. I was just like,
well, actually, that's another thing. I did. So that was a difficult one because I did a telestration on that last time. Again, and it's knowing how the teams use the halts as an ability, and you have to try and essentially it's kind of like penalties in football, if you like. You know, the goalkeepers they study the strikers, they study the players and their preferences of where they hit the ball. It's kind of like that. You have to study where they usually put the halts. And Custer read their previous game. He saw Gesture put it on the right side.
Yeah, or take his fate. Yeah.
So yeah, just mind games upon mind games of them out playing each other. So yeah, and yeah, that was the moment. As soon as I saw Custer getting picked, I was like, well, that's it then.
Yeah, that was when we knew.
Okay, so we've ended up with this upset scenario where the finals teams are Fusion and Spitfire, which obviously not what people expected coming into the playoffs. The big dogs have been eliminated. How do you break down this final? Who's the favorite? Let's start with that. Who was the favorite?
Hype. That's how you break it down.
I will say, first off, let's just note that from a marketing perspective, it is much less sexy than a New York LA final.
Don't care, mate. It's going to be dumb hype.
No, it's going to be super hype. I agree.
The best final for marketing would have definitely been, of the available candidates, it would have been New York, London, because New York and London are the two largest cities in the Western world. New York first, London second. You also have all of the Europeans behind London, and you would have all of the Americans behind New York. That is definitely, for marketing purposes, the best possible final you could ask for.
Yeah,
we're not getting that.
We're not. No, I'm still actually super pleased that we have got this finals, because these are two teams that I deem to have the best DPS duos in the league right now. In the form of Carpe, EQO, and Birder and Profit. I think that's going to be absolutely ridiculous, because that's the one aspect of Overwatch that I really like and appreciate coming from Team Fortress 2 is the mechanical skill on some of these heroes. And when somebody's hitting shots, like, everyone can appreciate that, and it's always lovely to see. And we're going to have an absolute treat, assuming they all perform. But we've also got two of the most aggressive teams coming up head to head. So I'm expecting a scrappy game here. And in my mind, I was torn on who to predict for this one, because it is 50-50 in the way it goes. Like, from the way these teams play and their play styles. Now, London have a superior tank line. They have a superior support line compared to Philadelphia. But then Philly just seem to be able to pull these wins out because they enable Carpe so much. So there's a real divide in my mind for it. But I'm giving the edge to London in this match. But it's only very slightly. It's very slightly. Honestly, anything could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's up in the air. I take a slightly different view on who's going to win here. And I mean, it really depends on how you go on it. But I feel like part of London's strength almost came from the holy shit, we have nothing to lose, etc., which has been a huge surge of confidence. But I do wonder in the break of a week here, as they now have to kind of step back and think about things again, if that's going against their mind, whereas Fusion has just been steady and good all the way through. I feel like the framework for Fusion to win is a lot more firm than the framework for London, where, I mean, London kind of caught lightning in a bottle, and if they can keep up on the same pace, great. But I feel like between the two teams, if either team was going to have a drop-off between their semifinal performance and finals performance, it would be London, just based on the circumstances of which London suddenly surged. So given the fact that, I think correctly, we're kind of rating the teams pretty even in a lot of key areas, I would probably give the edge to Philly. I
would definitely not. I think London's a huge favorite.
A huge favorite. Why do you think
a huge favorite? So first off, they're on such a hot streak right now. I think that they had the harder path to the finals, and not only with the harder path, out of their last 14 maps, they've lost 1. So ever since catching on fire, they've been dominant. They have the advantage of having Bidoshin be in every game instead of having to sub out Boombox when you want to show more of the look. So in terms of in-game versatility, they're slightly ahead. I think that the DPS duos are very close, but I personally do not. I would give the DPS edge very slightly to London, but even if you think that Philly's DPSs have the advantage, it's not by a significant margin. However, I think that the tank line of London is way better, and I think the support line of London is way better. So when you combine those two factors, you may have one slight advantage for Philadelphia, but you have many more for London. They have more flexibility with the compositions, thanks to Bidoshin being in every map. Unless there's like the one downfall could be if London was in a position play Reinhardt a lot, but I don't really see that happening. Yeah. Gesture is fantastic at Monkey, one of the best, if not the best, Orisa player in the league. So I think London has a big advantage, and frankly, they've just looked more coordinated than Philadelphia.
Yeah, no, one of the aspects that's tearing me in terms of this prediction is I completely agree with that. But what I am uncertain of is like we mentioned before, like London were coming into their second match against Gladiators with a defeatist attitude. Like they'd already lost, they're just playing for fun. And it completely revamped the team, and then they start winning suddenly. So now that this is literally the highest stake Overwatch match that's ever been played in the history of the game. How are these players going to perform in front of 19,000 people? Like this,
you forget. But here's the other argument. They have veterans who have won Apex. They've been in front. They've been, or who have played in finals. They've been in front of massive 10,000
19K, surely.
Oh, okay, not that big, but like 8,000, 10,000, yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I would flip that on the other way and say, the Philly guys, well, right? They haven't played in
as we said, EQO's competitive experience was playing in the Israeli squad in the World Cup.
Exactly.
So there is one extra thing. I do remember the Overwatch World Cup last year did underperform on stage relative to what they're doing behind the scenes. So there might be something to the idea that Eco could have stage nerves now.
Well, actually, EQ has been one of the players who's been performing under the pressure better.
Well, no, he has. That's what I'm saying is that maybe if the idea is that you're going to resurrect that storyline, it would come back. I don't think it will. I will say, Monty, to your points, I don't really disagree with most of it. However, I'd say that that same logic could also apply to the idea that London should have been doing much better in the regular season, and they didn't have their act together for a big deal of it. If the same London shows up in the grand finals that we saw over the last week, I agree. I think London's going to take it. I just wonder, though, is that when the team had such issues behind the scenes in terms of like feeling defeated and otherwise, is that are they going to be able to keep up the same sort of adrenaline rush that they've been on into the grand finals? Because if they're not and they regress to where they're at beforehand, then Philly would have the stronger edge. It's a matter of, will the hot streak actually continue, in my mind?
In general, in esports, I have found that the favorites coming out of semis into finals, it's very hard for them to lose that hot streak simply because neither team can practice efficiently before the finals. Because in esports, once the teams are eliminated, you can't practice against them anymore. So literally what's going to happen this week is that I imagine Philly will either internally scrim or practice against their contenders roster, and maybe London will find some other contenders teams to play, or scrim versus British Hurricanes, even with British Hurricanes on crazy ping. So you're not getting quality practice. So really, like I oftentimes in esports, it's like there is like a stasis period from semis to finals, and you rarely see like big shifts in form between the two.
You also, I notice, tend to find that the reason why I actually have a personal theory that semi-finals are always the best matches is because, first of all, since a lot of these tournaments are single elim brackets, you never know that you're going to get the two best teams in the final anyway. So maybe there's a better chance they actually meet in the semis because obviously there's two matches there. There's only one final. But secondly, even though there is still pressure in a semi-final because you're playing to go to the final, it's not like we win the tournament if we win this match. So I think people actually play a lot more free when they're in the semi-finals. Whereas in finals, I think it's a lot less likely that people try like some wacky cheese or some crazy shit they've never done before. I think in the finals, with that much pressure, like you're saying, the biggest match so far in history, what's going to happen usually is you just play the way that to your strengths as a team and you hope you win. You know, there's actually a lot more nerves to, like, you don't want to, like, the last thing you want, the reason why you don't want to do a cheese is you don't want to look like a fool and lose the final. You don't mind losing the final if you just play your best. Here's my style, there's your style, let's see who's going to win.
In TI6, mate.
No,
remember that?
Question I want
Pudge Techies in the finals.
They were pretty sick. That was their whole identity as a team, to be fair.
One question I want to pose here, because I think it's an interesting one given the history of both these teams recently, is that whatever team wins on day one, because the grand finals are 2 days, do we see that team winning on day two, or do we see a case where the team that wins day one ends up losing on day two? Because I do see a situation where, like, Philly could end up winning day one and then London just pulls the same shit where they're just like, well, we have nothing to lose, come back, win games 2 and 3.
I think it's 2-0 for London.
Yeah, well, I imagine it's going to be a 2-0. That's the trend we've been seeing with the semi-finals, at least.
And the reason why I say that is both that I think London is much better in this meta, but also because I think, like, there's only 1 day to change strategies, so it's not very much time. You know, previously teams have had 2 days, 3 days to switch their strategies. You basically have 20 hours. Less, because when you finish the match, you basically have 18 hours maybe. And you have to sleep.
If London comes in as the favourite, who is the player on Philadelphia Fusion who could be the X factor to take
Carpe.
the top?
Carpe.
Yeah,
like
Carpe and
Carpe, it's not saying it's impossible for Philly to win this. I think that Carpe has insane carry potential. The problem is that the London tanks have been so good at shutting down Widowmakers that it's going to be even harder for him to shine. Now, if he does shine under those circumstances, he is definitely playoff MVP.
I think London needs to come in with the same mindset of any team in the AFC East that goes against the Dolphins, which is squish the fish. Even though it doesn't make sense to people go, like, wait, a dolphin's a mammal. It makes sense in the context of AFC East football, is a long time saying. I will say this, and I'm going to go off on a limb on a crazy prediction here where maybe I'll end up regretting it, but here's how I'm seeing it right now. I think London takes set number 1 and Philly runs it back on day 2.
Okay.
I don't think that's going to. I think that's like the least. I think that's the least likely.
My reasoning is that I think London will keep their momentum going in. I think they'll take set 1. But I do think the pressure of having to defend that set on day 2 might actually get to them. And an otherwise fairly even set where I think London does have a few edges, but I see Philly taking it on day 2.